Was Yahweh always the god of monotheism, the singular creator? Or did his story begin very differently? What if the familiar image of a universal deity obscures a much more complex and contested journey from a tribal storm god to a global divinity? Can the arc of monotheism be a straight line or a more complex weaving? These questions are at the heart of a mystery that has shaped civilizations and continues to influence our world today. To that end, we embark on a journey to explore the hidden evolution of Yahweh, tracing his transformation from a localized deity of the ancient Near East to the supreme god of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. This is not simply a story of unwavering faith passed down through generations, but a multifaceted narrative shaped by the forces of syncretism, political maneuvering, and esoteric reinterpretations. As we shall see, the concept of Yahweh was not static, divinely ordained from the outset, but rather a dynamic and evolving construct, constantly being reshaped by the shifting sands of history and the diverse beliefs of those who worshipped him. It is therefore crucial to ask, how did this transformation occur, and what were the key influences that shaped the image of Yahweh over time? Central to this evolution is the recurring pattern of syncretism, the blending of different religious traditions. Early Yahwehism, far from being a pure and isolated system, absorbed elements from other ancient Near Eastern religions, particularly those of Canaan and Mesopotamia. The worship of Yahweh was often intertwined with that of other deities, such as El, Baal, and Asherah, reflecting a complex interplay of religious beliefs and practices. For example, the adoption of Canaanite agricultural festivals into the Yahwistic calendar demonstrates the assimilation of pagan traditions into the evolving Israelite faith. But were these religious fusions purely organic, or did political agendas also play a role in shaping the religious landscape of ancient Israel? The geographical location of ancient Israel, situated at the crossroads of major civilizations, further contributed to this melting pot of religious ideas. From the Bronze Age collapse to the rise and fall of empires, the region was constantly exposed to new cultural and religious influences. Key periods, such as the Babylonian exile and the Hellenistic period, witnessed significant shifts in the understanding and worship of Yahweh, as Jewish communities interacted with new philosophical and theological concepts. It is within this context of constant interaction and exchange that the evolution of Yahweh must be understood. Understanding this evolution is of profound significance for comprehending the origins of monotheism and the development of Western civilization. The monotheistic beliefs that emerged from ancient Israel have had a profound impact on ethics, politics, and culture, shaping the course of history and influencing the lives of billions of people. The continued relevance of these issues in contemporary society, particularly in regions plagued by religious conflict, underscores the importance of examining the historical roots of these faiths. The global influence of Yahwistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam on art, literature, law, and social structures is undeniable, but a deeper understanding of Yahweh's evolution can lead to a more nuanced and critical perspective on religious beliefs, challenging simplistic narratives and promoting interfaith dialogue. Indeed, a deeper look into Yahweh's evolution can offer a pathway to personal spiritual growth through exploring the complexities of religious history. By challenging dogmatic interpretations of Scripture and examining the historical context in which these texts were written, we can gain a more nuanced understanding of the human quest for meaning and the diverse ways in which people have sought to connect with the divine. We aim to reveal hidden dimensions of religious history and challenging conventional wisdom by touching upon the political motivations behind religious reforms in ancient Israel, the absorption of pagan elements into Yahwehism, and the radical reinterpretations of Yahweh within Gnostic traditions. Before we delve deeper, it is essential to define some key terms. Monotheism, of course, refers to the belief in one God, while polytheism involves the worship of multiple deities. Henotheism, a term often used to describe early Yahwehism, denotes the worship of one particular god while acknowledging the existence of other gods. Syncretism, as we have mentioned, is the blending of different religious beliefs and practices. A pantheon is a collection of deities belonging to a particular religion or mythology. In this context, Yahweh initially appears as a tribal storm god associated with Mount Sinai and the southern regions of Canaan, a warrior god who leads the Israelites in battle. Early biblical passages, such as the Song of Deborah, depict Yahweh as a powerful but localized deity, far removed from the omnipotent creator of later monotheistic theology. As we proceed, we will explore several key knowledge threads: the Canaanite origins of Yahwehism, the influence of Mesopotamian religion, the Deuteronomic reforms, the Babylonian exile, and the rise of Jewish mysticism. Each of these topics is significant for understanding Yahweh's evolution and the diverse ways in which his nature and role in the cosmos have been understood. We'll also explore the Kabbalistic concept of the Sephirot as different aspects of God's being, and the Gnostic portrayal of Yahweh as a flawed demiurge. Through these reinterpretations, Yahweh emerges not as a static, unchanging entity, but as a dynamic and evolving concept, constantly being reshaped by the beliefs and experiences of those who worship him. But was Yahweh always conceived as a singular, universal God? How did his relationship with other deities evolve over time? And what role did political and social factors play in shaping his image? The biblical narrative presents a simplified and idealized version of Yahweh's history, obscuring the complex and contested process of his evolution, but alternative narratives and suppressed perspectives offer a glimpse into the hidden dimensions of religious history. By examining archaeological evidence and non-biblical texts, we can begin to uncover the syncretistic tendencies and reinterpretations of Yahweh that have continued to manifest in contemporary religious beliefs and practices. What, then, can the complete history of Yahweh teach us about the nature of religion, the power of belief, and the human quest for meaning? The answer, as we'll see, lies in recognizing that the evolution of Yahweh was not a linear progression towards a divinely ordained truth, but a complex and dynamic process shaped by the interplay of diverse cultural, political, and esoteric forces. So, let's begin our journey by examining the ancient Near Eastern context in which Yahwehism first emerged. How did Yahweh, the god of unwavering monotheism, begin as a storm deity, a warrior amidst the pantheon of the ancient Near East? What primal forces and ancient associations shaped the nascent Yahweh before he became the singular creator? The answer lies buried in archaeological finds, early biblical texts, and a comparative understanding of the religious landscape of the southern Levant. Consider the Mesha stele, a basalt stone inscribed around 840 BCE. This artifact, discovered in Jordan, provides one of the earliest extra-biblical references to Yahweh. Mesha, the king of Moab, boasts of his victories over Israel, attributing his success to Chemosh, the Moabite national god. However, the stele also mentions Yahweh as a national god of Israel, suggesting a localized deity with limited territorial influence. It is crucial to note that this depiction stands in stark contrast to the later image of Yahweh as the omnipotent creator of the entire universe, whose dominion extends far beyond the borders of ancient Israel. This begs the question, what factors drove this transformation from a tribal deity to a universal god? Originally, Yahweh's attributes were inextricably linked to the raw power of nature. He was associated with thunder, lightning, and mountains, particularly Mount Sinai, the site of the covenant with Moses. These elements were not merely symbolic. They reflected the very essence of Yahweh's character as a powerful storm god who could unleash both destruction and life-giving rain. Compare this with Baal, the Canaanite storm god, who also wielded thunder and lightning. Baal was often depicted as riding upon the clouds, bringing fertility to the land. Did the early Israelites, influenced by their Canaanite neighbors, initially perceive Yahweh in a similar light, as a storm god whose power was manifested through natural phenomena? The earliest depictions of Yahweh, if they existed at all, were likely far different from the later iconic representations found in synagogues and churches. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Israelites may have worshipped Yahweh alongside other deities, such as Asherah, the Canaanite goddess of fertility. Inscriptions found at Kuntalit Adrad, a religious site in the Sinai Peninsula, refer to Yahweh and his Asherah, suggesting a syncretistic form of worship. What does this suggest about the fluid nature of early Israelite religious beliefs? Was the concept of a singular, exclusive Yahweh a later development, forged in the crucible of political and religious reforms? Early Yahwehism emerged within a specific social context, serving as a tribal religion that provided identity and protection to the Israelites. As a warrior god, Yahweh led them in battle, delivering them from their enemies. His image as a strong and dependable protector would have been particularly appealing to a nomadic people engaged in frequent conflicts with their neighbors. Consider the Exodus narrative, where Yahweh delivers the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, parting the Red Sea and leading them to freedom. This powerful story served as a cornerstone of Israelite identity, solidifying Yahweh's role as their divine liberator. But how much of this narrative is historical fact, and how much is mythologized history shaped by later theological agendas? How did Yahweh's tribal role evolve as the Israelites transitioned from a nomadic people to a settled agricultural society? As the Israelites settled in Canaan, they inevitably came into contact with the religious beliefs and practices of the indigenous population. This interaction led to a significant degree of religious syncretism, with Yahwehism absorbing elements from Canaanite religion, particularly concerning fertility cults and agricultural practices. The worship of Baal and Asherah by some Israelites, as condemned by the prophets, is a testament to the pervasive influence of Canaanite religion. Did the early Israelites view Yahweh as simply another god in the Canaanite pantheon, albeit their own patron deity? Or was there a conscious effort to distinguish Yahweh from other gods, even as they adopted elements from their worship? The adoption of Canaanite deities and myths into Yahwehism raises profound questions about the origins and development of Israelite religion. Some scholars suggest that Yahweh himself may have originated as a Canaanite deity, possibly related to the god El, the head of the Canaanite pantheon. The similarities between the Canaanite creation myth and the Genesis creation narrative further suggest a degree of cultural and religious exchange. Was the Genesis creation narrative simply a reinterpretation of earlier Canaanite myths, adapted to fit the Yahwistic worldview? And if so, what does this tell us about the creative process of religious innovation? The assimilation of solar elements into Yahwehism represents another significant aspect of Canaanite influence. As the Israelites came to associate Yahweh with light, glory, and cosmic power, they may have drawn inspiration from the solar deity Shamash, who was widely worshipped in the ancient Near East. Biblical passages that depict Yahweh as a source of light and righteousness bear striking similarities to depictions of solar deities in other ancient Near Eastern religions. Does this suggest that Yahweh gradually absorbed the attributes of other gods, becoming a composite deity who embodied a wide range of powers and characteristics? Or was the association of Yahweh with light simply a symbolic representation of his divine nature, drawing upon a common cultural vocabulary? The political ramifications of religious syncretism were far-reaching, often leading to social unrest and challenges to royal authority. The prophets played a crucial role in condemning syncretistic practices and advocating for religious purity. The Deuteronomic reforms under King Josiah, which aimed to eliminate Canaanite influences from Yahwehism and centralize worship in Jerusalem, represent a pivotal moment in this struggle. But were these reforms driven solely by religious zeal, or were they also motivated by political considerations? To what extent did Josiah use religious reform to consolidate his power and assert his authority over rival factions? As we continue to explore the origins of Yahweh, it becomes increasingly apparent that the story is far more intricate than traditional accounts might suggest. What unexpected truths will further exploration reveal? As we consider these questions, let's turn our attention eastward to the land of Mesopotamia to explore the parallels and influences that shaped Yahweh. As we journey from the syncretistic melting pot of early Yahwehism to the rigid monotheism of later Judaism, we encounter one of the most pivotal events in the history of Yahweh, the Babylonian exile. How did this period of profound suffering and displacement forge the very concept of a universal, transcendent God? The exile, far from diminishing Yahweh's power, paradoxically amplified it, setting the stage for the Yahweh we know today. The Babylonian exile, spanning from 586 to 539 BCE, was a cataclysmic event for the Israelite people. King Nebuchadnezzar II's conquest of Judah led to the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, the symbolic and spiritual heart of Israelite society. The elite, including priests, scribes, and artisans, were deported to Babylon, leaving behind a shattered kingdom and a deeply traumatized populace. The prophet Jeremiah, who remained in Jerusalem, witnessed the devastation firsthand, lamenting the destruction in what would become the Book of Lamentations. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. He wrote, expressing the profound grief and despair that gripped the Israelites. This theological crisis challenged the very foundations of their faith. Had Yahweh abandoned them? Was he powerless to protect his chosen people? Or was there a deeper meaning to this suffering? The exile forced a radical reinterpretation of Yahweh and his relationship with Israel. The prophets, particularly those writing during the exile, such as Deutero-Isaiah, presented the exile not as a sign of Yahweh's weakness, but as a punishment for Israel's sins, a consequence of their covenantal infidelity. This interpretation, while harsh, served to maintain Yahweh's sovereignty and justice. More importantly, the exile led to the emergence of a more explicit and universal form of monotheism. Deutero-Isaiah proclaimed Yahweh as the sole creator and ruler of the universe, whose power transcended geographical boundaries and political circumstances. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God, he declared, asserting Yahweh's absolute uniqueness and universal dominion. This shift was crucial because it allowed the Israelites to maintain their faith even in the absence of their temple and their land. Yahweh was no longer just the God of Israel. He was the God of all creation, whose presence could be felt anywhere. But was this shift solely due to internal theological developments, or did external influences play a role? The Israelites in Babylon were exposed to Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion that centered on the worship of Ahura Mazda, a single, supreme god. Zoroastrianism also featured a dualistic struggle between good and evil, light and darkness, represented by Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, also known as Ahriman. While the extent of Zoroastrian influence on Jewish monotheism is debated, some scholars argue that it may have contributed to the development of Jewish angelology and demonology. The concept of a cosmic struggle between good and evil forces, as well as the belief in a hierarchy of angels and demons, may have been influenced by Zoroastrian ideas. Did the interaction with Zoroastrianism provide a new framework for understanding Yahweh's role in the cosmos, further solidifying the concept of a single, all-powerful God engaged in a cosmic battle against evil? As the Persian Empire, under Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon, a new chapter began for the Israelites. Cyrus issued a decree allowing the exiles to return to Judea and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. This event, known as the Return to Zion, marked a turning point in Jewish history. How did this return shape the religious and cultural landscape of the Second Temple period, and what new theological developments emerged during this time? The Second Temple period, spanning from approximately 515 BCE to 70 CE, witnessed a restoration of Jewish religious life in Judea, but also a period of intense political and social upheaval. Ezra and Nehemiah played key roles in rebuilding the temple and restoring Jewish law and social order. However, the Jews remained under foreign rule, first under the Persians, then the Greeks, and finally the Romans. This constant experience of foreign domination fueled messianic expectations and apocalyptic visions. It was during this period that apocalyptic literature flourished, offering a vision of hope and deliverance in the face of oppression. Apocalyptic literature, characterized by its use of symbolism, visions, and prophecies of cosmic upheaval and divine judgment, provided a framework for understanding the suffering and injustice of the present age. The Book of Daniel, written during the Maccabean Revolt, c. 165 BCE, is a prime example of apocalyptic literature. Daniel's visions of future empires, symbolized by strange beasts, and the coming of God's kingdom offered hope to the Jews during a time of intense persecution. The book also introduced new beliefs about the afterlife, including the resurrection of the dead and eternal reward for the righteous. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt, Daniel wrote, articulating a radical new vision of eschatology. Did these new beliefs about the afterlife transform Jewish ethics, encouraging individuals to live righteously in anticipation of a future judgment and reward? The concept of the afterlife became increasingly important during the Second Temple period, with new beliefs emerging about resurrection, eternal reward, and eternal punishment. These beliefs contrasted sharply with earlier Israelite notions of Sheol, a shadowy underworld where all the dead, regardless of their earthly deeds, were believed to reside. The idea of resurrection, as expressed in the Book of Daniel, offered hope for vindication and justice in the afterlife. Those who had suffered for their faith would be rewarded with eternal life, while the wicked would face eternal punishment. This shift in eschatology had a profound impact on Jewish ethics, encouraging individuals to live according to God's commandments in anticipation of a future reckoning. How did these shifting beliefs influence the development of early Christian theology, which also placed a strong emphasis on resurrection and eternal life? Alongside these evolving beliefs about the afterlife, messianic expectations intensified during the Second Temple period. Many Jews hoped for a future king or leader who would deliver them from oppression and establish God's kingdom on earth. Various messianic figures emerged during this period, each claiming to be the one who would fulfill the prophecies and usher in a new era of peace and justice. Simon bar Kokhba, who led a Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire in the 2nd century CE, was hailed by many as the Messiah, though his rebellion ultimately failed. The rise of messianic expectations during the Second Temple period set the stage for the emergence of Christianity, with its belief that Jesus of Nazareth was the long-awaited Messiah. But even before Christianity arose, what esoteric interpretations of Yahweh were developing within Judaism itself? During the Second Temple period and the early Rabbinic period, early forms of Jewish mysticism began to emerge. These mystical traditions, while diverse, shared a common emphasis on direct experience of God, esoteric knowledge, and symbolic interpretation of Scripture. They sought to penetrate the hidden dimensions of reality and to attain a deeper understanding of God's nature and will. How did these early mystical explorations reshape the understanding of Yahweh, moving beyond the literal interpretations of Scripture to uncover deeper, more profound meanings? Merkaba mysticism, which focused on visions of God's throne chariot, the Merkaba, as described in the Book of Ezekiel, was one of the most prominent forms of early Jewish mysticism. Merkaba mystics sought to ascend to the divine realm and experience God's presence through meditation, prayer, and ritual practices. The Hekhalot literature, a collection of mystical texts dating from the early centuries CE, provides detailed descriptions of the heavenly realms and the rituals used to access them. These texts depict a complex cosmology, with multiple levels of heaven and a hierarchy of angels who guarded the gates to the divine presence. What techniques did Merkaba mystics use to induce these visionary experiences, and what insights did they gain about the nature of Yahweh and the cosmos? The development of Jewish angelology played a crucial role in these mystical traditions. Angels were seen as intermediaries between God and humanity, serving as messengers, protectors, and agents of divine power. A complex hierarchy of angels emerged, each with specific roles and functions. Michael was often portrayed as the chief of the angels, a warrior who defended Israel against its enemies. Gabriel served as a messenger, delivering divine revelations to prophets and righteous individuals. Raphael was known as a healer and protector, as depicted in the Book of Tobit, where he guides and assists the young Tobiah on his journey. This complex angelic hierarchy reflected a growing emphasis on the transcendence of God, who was seen as increasingly distant and inaccessible to human beings. How did these beliefs about angels influence later Kabbalistic traditions, which further elaborated on the angelic realm and its relationship to the divine emanations? While these early forms of Jewish mysticism remained largely within the bounds of Orthodox Judaism, there may have been some early interactions between Jewish mysticism and Gnostic thought. Gnosticism, a diverse religious movement that flourished in the early centuries CE, emphasized esoteric knowledge, gnosis, as the key to salvation. Some Gnostic systems incorporated elements from Jewish tradition, reinterpreting biblical figures and narratives in radical new ways. While direct evidence of Gnostic influence on early Jewish mysticism is limited, there may have been some shared themes and concepts, such as the belief in divine emanations and the importance of esoteric knowledge. Could these early interactions have laid the groundwork for the later development of Kabbalah, which incorporated elements from both Jewish and Gnostic traditions? Having explored the shifts that occurred during the Babylonian exile and the Second Temple, the emergence of explicit monotheism, apocalyptic literature, and early Jewish mysticism, we begin to see a more nuanced and complex picture of Yahweh's evolution. We see the emergence of competing interpretations of Yahweh's nature and will, and the tensions between different religious groups and theological perspectives. Yet, we are just scratching the surface. What we'll discover next is even more shocking. So, how did the Gnostics, who challenged conventional monotheistic beliefs, reimagine Yahweh, and what implications did this have for their understanding of God and the cosmos? So, how did the Gnostics, who challenged conventional monotheistic beliefs, reimagine Yahweh, and what implications did this have for their understanding of God and the cosmos? In a dramatic departure from traditional Jewish and emerging Christian views, Gnosticism presented a radical alternative, one that cast Yahweh in a very different light, leading to a fundamental restructuring of the divine narrative. Let us begin with a brief introduction to Gnosticism. Flourishing in the early centuries CE, often in direct competition with early Christianity, Gnosticism wasn't a single, unified religion, but rather a diverse set of religious and philosophical movements. Figures such as Valentinus and Basilides spearheaded these movements, each offering unique interpretations of reality, salvation, and the nature of the divine. The social and intellectual context of the Roman Empire, with its religious pluralism and philosophical ferment, provided fertile ground for Gnosticism to emerge as an alternative to mainstream religious and philosophical thought. But what core concepts underpinned this alternative worldview, and how did they clash with conventional monotheistic beliefs? At the heart of Gnosticism lie several core concepts that challenge conventional monotheistic beliefs. Dualism, the belief in two opposing forces good and evil, stands in stark contrast to the monotheistic view of a single, all-good God. In Gnostic cosmology, the material world is seen as inherently flawed and imperfect, a prison for the divine spark trapped within human beings. This contrasts sharply with the monotheistic view of a divinely created world that is fundamentally good, or at least created with benevolent intention. This leads to the central idea of the demiurge, a flawed creator god responsible for fashioning the material world. How does this concept of the demiurge redefine the role and nature of Yahweh, and what are the implications for understanding God and the cosmos? The Gnostics daringly reinterpreted Yahweh as the demiurge, a lesser, ignorant, or even malevolent creator god who fashioned the material world. In the Gnostic creation myth, the demiurge creates the world without the knowledge or consent of the true, transcendent God, often referred to as the monad or the pleroma. The material world, therefore, is not a reflection of divine perfection, but a flawed and imperfect creation, a prison for the divine spark trapped within human beings. This divine spark, a fragment of the true God, is imprisoned within the material body, yearning for liberation. Gnostics believed that the demiurge, in his ignorance, claimed to be the only God, unaware of the true, transcendent God beyond him. Given this radical reinterpretation, what implications does the Gnostic view of Yahweh have for their understanding of God and the cosmos, and how did they seek to liberate themselves from the demiurge's control? The Gnostic view of Yahweh profoundly impacted their understanding of God and the cosmos. They believed that the true God was beyond human comprehension, a transcendent being of pure light and goodness, far removed from the flawed creation of the demiurge. Gnostics sought to liberate themselves from the demiurge's control through esoteric knowledge and spiritual practices, aiming to awaken the divine spark within and ascend to the realm of the true God. Gnosis, or knowledge, was considered the key to unlocking the divine spark and escaping the material world. This gnosis was not merely intellectual knowledge, but a transformative, experiential understanding of the true nature of reality. So, with this Gnostic framework in mind, let us turn to specific texts and beliefs to see how these concepts played out in their understanding of Yahweh. Turning to specific Gnostic texts, we can find varying beliefs of Yahweh. The Apocryphon of John, a key Gnostic text, vividly describes the creation of the world by the demiurge, whom it identifies with Yahweh. The text portrays Yahweh as an arrogant and ignorant being who claims to be the only God, unaware of the true, transcendent God beyond him. Specific passages from the Apocryphon of John depict Yahweh's flawed character and his creation of a flawed world, highlighting the Gnostic critique of the Old Testament God. But how exactly does this text portray Yahweh's flawed character, and what does it reveal about the Gnostic worldview? In the Apocryphon of John, Yahweh declares, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." However, the text reveals that this declaration is born out of ignorance, as Yahweh is unaware of the true, transcendent God who exists beyond his limited perception. The text goes on to describe Yahweh's creation of the material world as a flawed and imperfect act, resulting in a world of suffering, ignorance, and illusion. Furthermore, on the origin of the world, another important Gnostic text portrays Yahweh creating humanity in ignorance, without the knowledge or consent of the true God. This text even frames the serpent in the Garden of Eden in a positive light, as an agent of true knowledge who defies Yahweh's commands and offers humanity the opportunity to awaken to their true nature. What are the implications of portraying the serpent as a benefactor of humanity, and how does this challenge traditional interpretations of the Garden of Eden narrative? The portrayal of the serpent as a benefactor of humanity represents a radical reinterpretation of the Genesis narrative. In this version, the serpent offers Adam and Eve the knowledge of good and evil, which is seen not as a sin, but as a step towards enlightenment. By disobeying Yahweh's command, Adam and Eve awaken to their true nature as divine beings trapped in a material world created by an ignorant God. This challenges the traditional view of the fall as a consequence of human disobedience, instead framing it as a necessary step towards spiritual liberation. Moreover, the hypostasis of the archons depicts Yahweh and his archons, or ruling spirits, as tyrannical forces who seek to keep humanity in a state of ignorance and bondage. The text portrays the archons as jealous and envious beings who fear the awakening of human consciousness, actively working to suppress human potential and maintain their control over the material world. But how did Valentinian Gnosticism further elaborate on these themes, and what was its unique perspective on Yahweh's place in the cosmos? Valentinian Gnosticism, a prominent Gnostic school, developed a complex cosmology that posited a series of divine emanations, or eons, that emanate from the true, transcendent God. This true, transcendent God is beyond all description and comprehension. Valentinians viewed Yahweh as one of the lower eons, far removed from the true God and limited in his understanding. The Valentinian concept of the pleroma, or the fullness of God, highlights the vast distance between the true God and the demiurge, who is seen as a limited and distorted reflection of this divine reality. The figure of Sophia, or wisdom, plays a central role in Valentinian cosmology, as her actions inadvertently lead to the creation of the demiurge and the material world. This narrative emphasizes the complexity and interconnectedness of the divine realm, while also highlighting the flaws and limitations of the demiurge's creation. So, with these diverse Gnostic perspectives in mind, let us examine the contradictions, challenges, and interpretative consequences that arise from these radical reinterpretations of Yahweh. These Gnostic reinterpretations of Yahweh challenged the conventional monotheistic conception of God as all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good. By portraying Yahweh as a flawed and ignorant creator, Gnosticism undermined the authority of the Hebrew Bible and the traditional Jewish priesthood. This challenge to religious authority had significant implications for theological orthodoxy, leading to conflicts between Gnostics and mainstream religious authorities. How did this challenge impact the ethical framework of Gnostic communities, and what social and political consequences did it entail? The ethical implications of the Gnostic view of Yahweh led to a rejection of the Old Testament law and an emphasis on individual spiritual liberation. Gnostics often disregarded social norms and ethical rules, prioritizing their own spiritual development above all else. This rejection of traditional morality often led to accusations of libertinism and immorality from their opponents. Furthermore, the social and political consequences of Gnostic beliefs often led to conflict with mainstream religious and political authorities, resulting in persecution and suppression. The Roman Empire and the early Church actively sought to eradicate Gnostic movements, viewing them as a threat to social order and religious orthodoxy. But how do these Gnostic ideas resonate in modern interpretations, and what relevance do they hold for contemporary spirituality and philosophical thought? Modern interpretations of Gnostic ideas continue to resonate with contemporary spirituality and philosophical thought, particularly in areas such as existentialism, postmodernism, and Jungian psychology. The Gnostic emphasis on individual experience, the rejection of blind faith, and the search for deeper meaning continue to appeal to those who question traditional religious dogmas. Figures like Carl Jung have drawn inspiration from Gnostic symbolism and mythology, viewing them as valuable tools for understanding the human psyche. As well, some modern thinkers interpret the Gnostic demiurge as a metaphor for the limitations of human reason or the oppressive forces of social and political institutions. But with this overview of Gnostic thought laid out before us, what happens next to the idea of the divine? In summary, the Gnostic view of Yahweh portrays him as the demiurge, a flawed creator god distinct from the true, transcendent God. This reinterpretation challenges conventional monotheistic beliefs, undermining the authority of the Hebrew Bible and traditional religious institutions. However, the Gnostic view of Yahweh is not the only alternative interpretation that has emerged throughout history. How did the Kabbalists reimagine Yahweh, and what unique insights did they offer into the nature of the divine? So, how did the Kabbalists, within the Jewish mystical tradition, interpret Yahweh, and what unique dimensions did they add to our understanding of the divine? Kabbalah, meaning reception or correspondence, offers a complex and deeply symbolic interpretation of God and the universe, seeking to unveil the hidden dimensions of reality that lie beneath the surface of the revealed Torah. This esoteric tradition, with its intricate web of symbols, emanations, and divine names, provides a radical lens through which to view Yahweh, transforming the often stern and patriarchal figure of the Old Testament into a multifaceted and dynamic expression of the divine. But before we plunge into the Kabbalistic depths, let's briefly trace its historical roots and identify its foundational texts. Kabbalah, while claiming ancient origins, emerged as a distinct mystical tradition in medieval Spain during the 12th and 13th centuries. Key texts like the Zohar, the Book of Splendor, attributed to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, became central to Kabbalistic thought, offering esoteric interpretations of the Hebrew Bible and outlining complex systems of cosmology and divine emanation. Influential figures like Isaac Luria in the 16th century further developed Kabbalistic thought, particularly through his doctrine of Tzimtzum, divine contraction, and Shevarat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. From Spain, Kabbalah spread throughout the Jewish world and eventually influenced Western esoteric traditions. But what are the core concepts that underpin this mystical system, and how do they relate to the Kabbalistic understanding of Yahweh? At the heart of Kabbalah lie several core concepts essential for understanding its unique perspective on Yahweh. First, we have the concept of Ein Sof, the infinite, unknowable God beyond all attributes and limitations. This is the God before manifestation, utterly beyond human comprehension. Second, the Sephirot, the 10 emanations or attributes through which the Ein Sof manifests itself in the created world. These are the 10 divine qualities that bridge the gap between the infinite God and the finite universe. Third, the doctrine of Tzimtzum, the contraction of God's being to create space for the universe. This is a crucial concept, explaining how a finite world could emerge from an infinite God. Fourth, the Tree of Life, a symbolic representation of the Sephirot and their interrelationships, is the primary map for navigating the divine realm. How do these concepts collectively shape the Kabbalistic understanding of Yahweh, and what picture do they paint of the divine? The Kabbalists mapped the different names and attributes of Yahweh onto the Sephirot, revealing the complex and multifaceted nature of the divine. Each Sephirah represents a particular aspect of God, such as Keter, the crown, representing God's ultimate will; Chakma, wisdom, representing God's creative intellect; and Binah, understanding, representing God's divine comprehension. By assigning specific names of God to different Sephirot, the Kabbalists sought to understand how the divine manifests in the world. For instance, the name El is associated with Hesed, loving kindness, while Elohim is associated with Jevurah, severity. This mapping reveals that Yahweh is not a monolithic entity, but a dynamic interplay of divine forces. But it gets even more interesting when we consider how Kabbalists reinterpret biblical narratives. Kabbalists are known to reinterpret biblical narratives, such as the creation story, the Exodus, and the giving of the Torah, attributing symbolic meanings to them that reveal hidden dimensions of meaning and offer deeper insights into God's relationship with humanity. Consider the Garden of Eden, which is seen as a symbol of the Sephirotic realm. The tree of knowledge, far from being a source of sin, becomes a representation of the human intellect, offering the potential for both good and evil. The serpent, depending on the interpretation, can represent the Kundalini force, divine energy itself. By reinterpreting these narratives, the Kabbalists transform familiar stories into profound allegories of spiritual growth and divine revelation. But what about the attributes and actions of this Kabbalistic Yahweh? Kabbalistic texts describe Yahweh's attributes as dynamic and interconnected, emphasizing that each attribute is balanced by its opposite, creating a tension that drives the creative process. God's attribute of Hesed, loving kindness, is balanced by Jevurah, severity, creating a dynamic tension that shapes the universe. This balance is essential for maintaining harmony in the cosmos. Without severity, loving kindness would become sentimental and ineffective. Without loving kindness, severity would become destructive. This interplay of opposing forces is a key feature of the Kabbalistic understanding of the divine. How does this relate to the Kabbalistic understanding of Yahweh's role in creation? The Kabbalistic understanding of Yahweh's role in creation highlights the concept of emanation, where the universe unfolds from God like a series of concentric circles. This emanation begins with the Ein Sof and proceeds through the Sephirot, each stage representing a further step away from the divine source. The concept of Shevarat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, explains the origin of evil and imperfection in the world. According to this doctrine, the vessels that were meant to contain the divine light shattered, scattering divine sparks throughout the material world, and it is humanity's task to help gather and restore these sparks through ethical action and spiritual practice. Now this makes us ask, what is the role of the divine feminine in all of this? The Kabbalistic concept of the Shekinah, the divine feminine, represents the immanent presence of God in the world, the aspect of the divine that is closest to humanity. The relationship between Yahweh and the Shekinah is crucial, as their union is essential for the well-being of the cosmos. The Kabbalists often see the Shekinah as a bride who must be united with her groom, Yahweh, to restore harmony to the universe. During times of exile and suffering, the Shekinah is said to be separated from Yahweh, causing imbalance and chaos in the world. The ultimate goal of Kabbalistic practice is to facilitate the reunion of Yahweh and the Shekinah, thereby bringing about redemption and healing for the entire cosmos. But here's what most people miss. This is not a literal union, but a symbolic representation of the integration of masculine and feminine principles within the divine and within ourselves. Isn't that neat? Kabbalistic interpretations of Yahweh embrace paradoxes and contradictions, reflecting the limitations of human understanding when grappling with the infinite nature of God. God is both transcendent and immanent, both infinite and finite, both all-powerful and yet seemingly limited by human free will. Kabbalists see these paradoxes not as problems to be solved, but as opportunities for deeper insight and spiritual growth. By embracing the inherent mystery of the divine, they open themselves to a more profound and transformative experience of God. These contradictions remind us that our understanding of Yahweh, or any concept of the divine, can only ever be partial and incomplete. Given all of this, how does Kabbalah compare to other esoteric interpretations of the divine? While Kabbalistic and Gnostic views of God share some similarities, such as the emphasis on esoteric knowledge and the concept of divine emanations, they also diverge in significant ways. Both traditions see the material world as a veil that obscures the true reality of God, but they differ in their understanding of the creator of that world. Both Gnosticism and Kabbalah share an emphasis on esoteric knowledge as the key to spiritual liberation. However, the nature of that knowledge and the path to salvation differ significantly between the two traditions. But how exactly do they differ, and what is the cause of the split? The main difference lies in their view of Yahweh. Kabbalists view Yahweh as ultimately good, even if his actions are sometimes difficult to understand, seeing him as a complex and multifaceted expression of the divine will. While Gnostics, as we've seen, view the demiurge, often identified with Yahweh, as flawed or even malevolent. Gnostics seek to escape the world through gnosis, knowledge, while Kabbalists seek to repair the world through mitzvot, good deeds, and prayer. In short, one seeks to transcend and escape a world made by a flawed being, while the other seeks to mend what has been broken to restore balance to all things. Given this important distinction, what are the ethical and practical implications? These differing views have significant ethical and practical implications. The Gnostic view often leads to a rejection of the material world and a focus on individual spiritual liberation, sometimes even at the expense of ethical considerations. The Kabbalistic view, on the other hand, emphasizes the importance of ethical action and social responsibility, seeing the repair of the world as an integral part of spiritual practice. While the Gnostic path emphasizes individual enlightenment, the Kabbalistic path emphasizes collective redemption. Given all of these differences and similarities, is there room for reconciliation? Interestingly, modern attempts to synthesize Kabbalistic and Gnostic ideas have emerged, particularly in contemporary spirituality and philosophical thought. Some thinkers see Kabbalah and Gnosticism as complementary paths, each offering unique insights into the nature of the divine and the human condition. Others attempt to integrate Gnostic critiques of religious authority with Kabbalistic practices of mystical exploration. These syntheses, while often controversial, reflect a growing desire to transcend traditional religious boundaries and forge a more inclusive and holistic understanding of spirituality. Remember, we're just scratching the surface of each of these concepts here. In summary, the Kabbalistic view of Yahweh portrays him as a complex and multifaceted God whose nature is revealed through the Sephirot and symbolic interpretations of Scripture. This esoteric knowledge offers deeper insights into the nature of the divine, while also highlighting the importance of ethical action and social responsibility. While differing from earlier interpretations, the Kabbalistic view adds a new layer of depth and complexity to our understanding of Yahweh. Now, as we prepare to move forward, what other esoteric traditions have reinterpreted Yahweh, and what new dimensions have they added to our understanding of the divine? Having explored Kabbalistic reinterpretations of Yahweh and touched on the Gnostic perspectives, it's crucial to recognize that these traditions represent only a fraction of the esoteric landscape. A vast ocean of esoteric thought, encompassing traditions such as Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, and countless others, has also engaged with the figure of Yahweh, each offering its unique lens through which to view the divine. These traditions, often acting as both inheritors and transformers of earlier esoteric ideas, further complicate and enrich our understanding of the evolution of monotheism. Interpretations of Yahweh within these diverse systems vary significantly, often diverging dramatically from mainstream theological doctrines and offering perspectives that can challenge the very foundations of conventional religious belief. So, how do we navigate this complex web of esoteric thought, and what new insights can we glean from these alternative perspectives? Let us now turn our attention to Hermeticism, an esoteric tradition rooted in the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a syncretic figure blending aspects of the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes. Said to be a contemporary of Moses, though more likely a figure emerging in the early centuries of the Common Era, Hermes Trismegistus is considered the purported author of the Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of texts exploring cosmology, alchemy, magic, and the nature of the divine. These texts, rediscovered during the Renaissance, profoundly influenced Western esoteric thought, shaping the worldview of figures like Giordano Bruno, Marsilio Ficino, and Isaac Newton. The very name Trismegistus, meaning thrice greatest, hints at the immense reverence accorded to this figure, seen as a sage possessing unparalleled wisdom and insight into the secrets of the universe. But why is Hermeticism particularly relevant for understanding later esoteric reinterpretations of Yahweh, and what unique perspective does it offer? Within Hermeticism, deities from various religions are often re-envisioned as symbolic representations of universal principles or aspects of the self. Rather than viewing Yahweh as a literal, anthropomorphic god, Hermeticists may reinterpret him as a symbol of a specific force or aspect of consciousness, such as divine will, creative power, or the principle of order. This symbolic approach allows them to integrate Yahweh into their unique systems of correspondences and interconnectedness, seeing him as one piece within a larger cosmic puzzle. One might say that the traditions use religious figures as keys to unlock hidden knowledge, to be utilized within personal practice. But how do these traditions integrate and transform the figure of Yahweh within their unique symbolic systems? And what does this tell us about the nature of religious belief itself? It's important to emphasize that interpretations of Yahweh within Hermetic traditions often diverge significantly from mainstream theology, presenting perspectives that can be considered controversial or even blasphemous from a traditional religious standpoint. The emphasis on personal interpretation and the rejection of external authority inherent in Hermeticism can lead to reinterpretations that challenge conventional understandings of God, religious dogma, and the very nature of spiritual authority. Indeed, this freedom of interpretation is a hallmark of many esoteric traditions, and in many ways, Hermeticism exemplifies this approach. But what core concepts underpin this tradition, and how do they inform their unique reinterpretation of Yahweh? A central concept within Hermeticism is that of the All, the ultimate, unknowable source of all existence. The All is often described as a boundless, infinite consciousness from which everything emanates and to which everything ultimately returns. This concept is closely related to the Hermetic understanding of God, which is not necessarily a personal deity, but rather a universal principle of intelligence, consciousness, and creative power. The Hermetic God is seen as both transcendent, existing beyond the created world, and immanent, present within every aspect of creation. This presence is the key to understanding how all components of reality are interconnected. What is the role of symbolism in this system, and how does it relate to the Hermetic understanding of Yahweh? Hermetic traditions often view deities and religious figures, including Yahweh, as symbols that can be used to facilitate personal transformation and spiritual growth. Understanding the symbolic meaning of these figures is considered far more important than taking them literally. By meditating on these symbols, contemplating their correspondences, and integrating them into their personal practices, Hermeticists seek to access deeper levels of consciousness and unlock hidden aspects of the self. This process is similar to the way a Jungian psychologist might work with archetypes, seeing them as universal patterns of the human psyche that can be used to understand and transform oneself. So how does this symbolic approach shape their understanding of Yahweh? One of the most fundamental Hermetic principles is the concept of correspondences and interconnectedness, encapsulated in the famous axiom, "As above, so below. As below, so above." This principle suggests that everything in the universe is interconnected and mutually influencing, from the largest cosmic structures to the smallest subatomic particles. Hermeticists believe that by understanding these correspondences, we can gain a deeper understanding of reality and our place within it. This perspective can lead to a more holistic and integrated understanding of Yahweh, seeing him not as an isolated deity, but as a part of a larger cosmic web of interconnected forces. Is the ultimate goal of Hermeticism not intellectual understanding, but rather personal transformation and spiritual evolution? Indeed, the principles of Hermeticism are ultimately a means for bringing about personal transformation and spiritual evolution, emphasizing self-reliance, personal responsibility, and the rejection of external authority. Hermeticists believe that each individual has the potential to achieve enlightenment and union with the divine through their own efforts. This emphasis on individual agency and self-discovery stands in stark contrast to many traditional religious systems, which emphasize obedience to authority and adherence to dogma. The individual is seen as the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe. But how might this manifest? What implications does this have for understanding and reinterpreting Yahweh? Consider, for instance, how a Hermeticist might approach the Old Testament through an alchemical lens. The alchemical process of transmutation, transforming base metals into gold, can be seen as a metaphor for the transformation of the self, purifying and refining one's consciousness to achieve enlightenment. In this context, Yahweh might be reinterpreted as a symbol of the potential for inner transformation, representing the divine spark within each individual that can be awakened and cultivated through spiritual practice. The trials and tribulations of the Israelites in the Old Testament could be seen as allegories for the challenges and obstacles that we face on our own spiritual journeys. This represents a stark contrast from earlier reinterpretations. This reinterpretation of Yahweh differs significantly from earlier views, such as the Gnostic portrayal of the demiurge or the Kabbalistic emphasis on divine emanations. Unlike the Gnostics, Hermeticists do not necessarily see Yahweh as a flawed or malevolent being. Unlike the Kabbalists, they may not focus on mapping divine attributes onto the Sephirot. Instead, they may view him as a symbol of a particular aspect of the self or a universal principle that can be used to facilitate personal transformation and spiritual growth. But what are the ethical implications of this reinterpretation, and how might it lead to a different approach to morality and social responsibility? Modern practitioners of Hermetic traditions may incorporate Yahweh into their rituals and practices as a symbolic representation of a particular force or aspect of consciousness. A magician might invoke Yahweh, not as a personal deity to be worshipped, but as a symbol of divine will, creative power, or the principle of order. They may draw upon biblical narratives and imagery to create powerful rituals that facilitate personal transformation and spiritual growth. Keep in mind, too, that modern interpretations often reflect the sociopolitical landscape of the day. In summary, this later esoteric reinterpretation of Yahweh, as exemplified by Hermeticism, offers a unique perspective that emphasizes personal transformation, symbolic understanding, and the interconnectedness of all things. Deities are symbols used to unlock deeper knowledge of the self. By viewing Yahweh as a symbol that can be used to facilitate personal transformation and spiritual growth, rather than a literal god to be worshipped, these traditions challenge conventional understandings of religion and offer a more individualistic and empowering approach to spirituality. But as we approach the final stretch of our exploration, what are the broader implications of this ongoing process of reinterpretation for understanding the nature of religion, the power of belief, and the human quest for meaning? And how do modern geopolitics play a role in this dynamic? Having touched on Hermeticism and its unique lens through which to view the divine, it's crucial to acknowledge that this tradition, too, represents just one facet of a vast and multifaceted esoteric landscape. Indeed, a multitude of esoteric traditions, including Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, and countless others, have also engaged with the figure of Yahweh, each offering its own unique perspective and contributing to the ongoing evolution of monotheistic thought. These traditions, often acting as both inheritors and transformers of earlier esoteric ideas, further complicate and enrich our understanding of the divine. One tradition of particular relevance to the study of later esoteric thought is the lemma. But why is the lemma particularly relevant? And what unique insights does it bring to this complex tapestry of esoteric interpretations? To understand this relevance, we must first turn to Aleister Crowley, a key figure in the development of the lemma and a controversial figure in the history of Western esotericism. You have probably heard his name before. Born in 1875, Crowley was an English occultist, ceremonial magician, poet, painter, novelist, and mountaineer. He was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and later founded his own magical order, the Argenteum Astrum. Crowley's intellectual background, combined with his extensive occult explorations, led him to develop a unique philosophical and spiritual system that he called the lemma. The foundational text of the lemma is Liber Alvel Leges, or the Book of the Law, which Crowley claimed to have received through a divine dictation in 1904. It is the Book of the Law that proclaims the arrival of the new eon and outlines the core principles of the lemmic thought. But why is the lemma, with its often provocative and iconoclastic approach, particularly relevant for understanding later esoteric reinterpretations of Yahweh? The answer lies in Crowley's explicit engagement with Judeo-Christian symbolism and his transvaluation of traditional religious values. The lemma often envisions deities from various religions, not as literal, anthropomorphic gods, but as symbolic representations of universal principles or aspects of the self. In this context, Yahweh may be reinterpreted as a symbol of a specific force or aspect of consciousness, such as divine will, creative power, or the principle of authority. Crowley challenged conventional morality and societal norms, and the lemma emphasizes individual sovereignty and the pursuit of one's true will as a path to spiritual liberation. But how does the lemma integrate and transform the figure of Yahweh within its unique symbolic system, particularly in relation to the concept of the new eon, and how might this challenge conventional understandings of God and religious authority? Before we delve deeper, it is important to emphasize that interpretations of Yahweh within the lemma often diverge significantly from mainstream theology and can be considered controversial or even blasphemous from a traditional perspective. Crowley's explicit critique of Judeo-Christian morality and his embrace of pagan and occult symbolism challenge conventional understandings of God and religious authority. Indeed, the potential for these reinterpretations to challenge conventional understandings of God and religious authority is precisely why it is so important to consider the lemma in our exploration of the evolving figure of Yahweh. But what are the core concepts that underpin this unique reinterpretation, and how do they inform the lemmic understanding of Yahweh? At the heart of the lemmic thought lies the concept of the great work, which refers to the individual's path of self-discovery and spiritual transformation. This process involves aligning oneself with one's true will, which is not merely one's desires, but rather one's unique purpose in the universe. The pursuit of the great work may involve challenging conventional morality and societal norms, as it requires individuals to shed limiting beliefs and embrace their full potential. In essence, it is about becoming who you are meant to be, not who society expects you to be. We must then ask, how does one discover the true will? The Lemma often views deities and religious figures as symbols that can be used to facilitate personal transformation and spiritual growth. It is important to understand the symbolic meaning of religious figures, rather than taking them literally. By meditating on these symbols, contemplating their correspondences, and integrating them into their personal practices, the Lemmites seek to access deeper levels of consciousness and unlock hidden aspects of the self. The God form within the Lemma can be connected to Jungian psychology, seeing deities as archetypal forces within the human psyche. In this sense, deities can be seen as tools that assist with internal investigations. But if these are not to be taken literally, what is the use of these symbols? Correspondences and interconnectedness are also important in the Lemma, as different symbols, deities, and aspects of the universe are seen as interconnected and mutually influencing. This perspective can lead to a more holistic and integrated understanding of reality. The tree of life in the Lemma maps correspondences between different deities, symbols, and aspects of the self, providing a framework for understanding the interconnectedness of all things. Through understanding these connections, one gains the ability to manipulate different forms of energy. This knowledge, once attained, can bring about the ultimate goal of bringing about personal transformation and spiritual evolution. The ultimate goal is personal transformation and spiritual evolution. The Lemma emphasizes self-reliance, personal responsibility, and the rejection of external authority. Crowley emphasized individual sovereignty and the pursuit of one's true will as a path to spiritual liberation. This emphasis on self-reliance and personal responsibility challenges conventional monotheistic ethics and emphasizes individual autonomy, self-expression, and the pursuit of one's true will, even if it conflicts with societal norms. This, in turn, can lead to the realization of one's potential. But how does this manifest in actual Thelemic practice, and how does it specifically relate to the reinterpretation of Yahweh? To illustrate this, let's turn to Liber Alvel Leges, the Book of the Law, which contains references to Yahweh that offer insights into his reinterpretation within the context of the new eon. In this context, Yahweh is often reinterpreted as a symbol of the old eon, the eon of Osiris, which is characterized by law, restriction, and suffering. The new eon, the eon of Horus, is characterized by freedom, self-expression, and the pursuit of one's true will. The replacement of the slave gods of the past with the concept of individual sovereignty and the pursuit of one's true will is a central theme in the Book of the Law. Consider the phrase, had, the manifestation of Nuit, and explain its implications for understanding the nature of the divine. How might we interpret Yahweh as a symbol of the old eon that must be transcended? Crowley's commentary on the Book of the Law further illuminates his interpretation of Yahweh in relation to other deities and symbolic figures. Crowley viewed Yahweh as a representative of a particular stage in human spiritual evolution, one that is now being superseded by the principles of the new eon. Yahweh, in Crowley's view, represents a limited and restrictive understanding of the divine, one that must be transcended to embrace the full potential of human consciousness. Yahweh is a dying God whose power is waning in the face of the rising forces of the new eon. But how does this differ from previous Gnostic and Kabbalistic traditions that we've already discussed? Compared with earlier views, there are differences and similarities. Unlike the Gnostics, who often portrayed Yahweh as a flawed or malevolent demiurge, the Lemmites do not necessarily view Yahweh in such negative terms. Rather, they see him as a symbol of a particular stage in human spiritual evolution, one that is now being superseded. Unlike the Kabbalists, who focused on mapping divine attributes onto the Sephirot, the Lemmites may use Yahweh as a symbol of a particular force or aspect of consciousness, such as divine will or creative power. What are the ethical implications of this reinterpretation, and how might it lead to a different approach to morality and social responsibility? Modern Thelemites may incorporate YAHWEH into their rituals and practices as a symbolic representation of a particular force or aspect of consciousness, and in doing so, may connect the interpretations to the socio-political landscape of the day. In specific rituals or meditations, YAHWEH may be invoked as a symbolic representation of a particular force or aspect of consciousness, such as the Abramelin operation, which involves invoking various deities and spirits, including those associated with the Judeo-Christian tradition. It is in the act of invocation that the practitioner comes to a more nuanced understanding of these divine forces. In summary, the Thelemic reinterpretation of YAHWEH offers a unique perspective that emphasizes personal transformation, symbolic understanding, and the interconnectedness of all things. Deities are viewed as symbols that unlock deeper knowledge of the self. By viewing YAHWEH as a symbol that can be used to facilitate personal transformation and spiritual growth, rather than a literal god to be worshipped, the lemma challenges conventional understandings of religion and offers a more individualistic and empowering approach to spirituality. But what are the implications of this ongoing process of reinterpretation for understanding the nature of religion, the power of belief, and the human quest for meaning? How do modern geopolitics play a role in this dynamic? Building upon the foundation laid by the lemma and its own unique lens for viewing the divine in the socio-political landscape, let us now delve into two more contemporary movements that radically reimagine YAHWEH: chaos magic and Reconstructionist theology. But could YAHWEH be a malleable entity, shaped by belief and intention, rather than a fixed, immutable God? This is the controversial question we must now address, challenging conventional theological assumptions and inviting us to explore radical reinterpretations. Before we proceed, let's clearly define our terms. Chaos magic, a postmodern magical paradigm, emphasizes personal experience, experimentation, and the rejection of dogma. Reconstructionist theology, a modern theological movement, seeks to revive ancient pagan religions in a contemporary context. These approaches may seem disparate, yet, as we shall see, they share surprising connections. In this section, we will explore how chaos magicians and Reconstructionist theologians engage with YAHWEH, emphasizing their unique perspectives and practices. It is crucial to state explicitly that this exploration will not endorse any particular viewpoint, but rather analyze these reinterpretations from a scholarly and esoteric perspective. But how do chaos magicians and Reconstructionist theologians reimagine and utilize YAHWEH within their respective frameworks? And what does this reveal about the nature of belief, identity, and the construction of deity? To answer this question, we must first understand the core tenets of chaos magic. Chaos magic emphasizes belief as a tool, the rejection of fixed pantheons, the importance of gnosis, altered states of consciousness, and the embrace of absurdity. Practitioners often treat belief as a fluid and adaptable instrument, adopting different belief systems as needed to achieve specific magical goals. A central technique in chaos magic is the use of sigil symbolic representations of desires or intentions, created and charged with energy to manifest desired outcomes. These sigils can be incredibly personalized. In contrast, Reconstructionist theology seeks to revive ancient pagan religions with a focus on historical accuracy, cultural authenticity, and religious innovation. Reconstructionists meticulously research ancient texts, archaeological findings, and cultural practices to reconstruct the beliefs and rituals of ancient religions as accurately as possible, while also acknowledging that complete reconstruction is impossible and that innovation is necessary to adapt these religions to the modern world. Reconstructionists often prioritize ethical considerations and social justice, seeking to create inclusive and sustainable religious communities, seeing it as a method for preserving ancient knowledge. While seemingly different, chaos magic and Reconstructionist theology share common ground. both emphasize personal experience, challenge conventional religious norms, and focus on practical application. However, chaos magic rejects fixed pantheons, while Reconstructionism strives for historical accuracy. But how do these seemingly contradictory frameworks come together in the re-envisioning of such an established deity? Let us now turn to the specific ways in which chaos magicians engage with Yahweh, often viewing belief as a tool to be wielded for magical purposes. Consider the concept of servitors in chaos magic, autonomous entities created through focused intention and belief. Some chaos magicians create servitors based on Yahweh, imbuing them with specific attributes and tasks, like protection, prosperity, or even vengeance. The process of creating and activating a Yahweh servitor involves sigil creation, ritual invocation, and energy work. The magician designs a sigil representing the desired attributes of the servitor, then performs a ritual to imbue the sigil with energy and consciousness, effectively bringing the servitor into existence. Some practitioners may even evoke the name of Yahweh in their rituals as a method of further empowering the servitor. Another common practice is the adoption of god forms in chaos magic, a process in which the magician temporarily embodies the attributes and powers of a particular deity. Some chaos magicians adopt the god form of Yahweh to access specific energies or achieve particular goals, like enhanced focus or the ability to command. Techniques used to enter and embody the Yahweh god form include meditation, visualization, and ritual drama. The magician might meditate on the attributes of Yahweh, visualize themselves merging with the deity, or perform a ritual drama in which they take on the role of Yahweh, reciting prayers or pronouncements associated with the deity. These examples illustrate how chaos magicians view Yahweh as a malleable force that can be shaped and directed through belief and intention. But what are the ethical implications of this approach? While it can be empowering, it also carries the risk of manipulation. This is a radical departure from traditional monotheistic views of God, where God is seen as an omnipotent and immutable being who cannot be controlled or manipulated by humans. But how does this compare to the approach of Reconstructionist theology? In contrast to the chaos magic, Reconstructionist theologians seek to revive ancient Yahwehism through historical accuracy and cultural authenticity. Reconstructionists attempt to reconstruct ancient Yahwistic rituals, drawing on archaeological evidence, biblical texts, and comparative religion. However, reconstructing these rituals is challenging, given the limited and often ambiguous sources. Archaeological evidence can provide insights into the material aspects of ancient rituals, such as the types of offerings made or the layout of temples, but it often reveals little about the beliefs and intentions behind those rituals. Likewise, some Reconstructionists create new rituals inspired by ancient Yahwistic practices, incorporating elements from other pagan traditions, such as harvest festivals or seasonal celebrations, weaving together different threads of ancient knowledge. Some Reconstructionists reimagine Yahweh within a polytheistic context, recognizing the existence of other deities and spirits alongside him. What would it mean to reconstruct the ancient Israelite pantheon, including figures like Asherah, Baal, and Mo? Such an approach has profound theological and ethical implications, challenging traditional monotheistic beliefs and raising questions about the nature of divinity. It could mean challenging traditionally held views and creating a more inclusive religious landscape. But how can ancient beliefs and practices be reconciled with modern ethical and social values? Thus, Reconstructionist theologians seek to revive ancient Yahwehism in a contemporary context, while remaining true to historical and cultural authenticity. Now that we have examined both approaches, let us turn to a comparison of the chaos magic and Reconstructionist perspectives, highlighting their similarities and differences. The chaos magic and Reconstructionist approaches to Yahweh both emphasize personal experience. However, their views on historical accuracy and religious authority differ considerably. Chaos magic embraces radical experimentation, while Reconstructionism values historical fidelity. But how might these perspectives be synthesized, creating a hybrid approach that combines the magical experimentation of chaos magic with the historical awareness of Reconstructionist theology? One could, for example, create a YAHWEH servitor with historically accurate attributes, drawing on ancient texts and archaeological findings to inform the servitor's design and purpose. However, such a synthesis also presents challenges. Reconciling the fluid, adaptable nature of chaos magic with the rigorous historical standards of Reconstructionism requires careful consideration and a willingness to navigate ambiguity. It is imperative to consider the ethical implications involved in both approaches. The potential for positive and negative outcomes are ever present. Personal responsibility, ethical awareness, and respect for different religious perspectives are paramount. In the wrong hands, either approach could be used to justify harmful actions or promote discriminatory beliefs. But how is the contemporary political landscape influencing both the chaos magic and Reconstructionist approaches to YAHWEH? Modern geopolitics has increasingly weaponized religious symbolism in political conflicts. Alternative approaches to YAHWEH may provide potential responses to these weaponized faith systems. By reinterpreting YAHWEH in ways that promote inclusivity, social justice, and environmental responsibility, practitioners can challenge the use of religion to justify violence and oppression. But we are just scratching the surface of the potential of these approaches, and what we'll discover next is even more shocking. In conclusion, we have explored the key reinterpretations of YAHWEH, emphasizing the diversity of perspectives and the ongoing evolution of religious beliefs. These reinterpretations radically challenge conventional monotheistic assumptions, highlighting the malleability of YAHWEH as a concept, shaped by human belief, intention, and cultural context. What does the ongoing reinterpretation of YAHWEH tell us about the nature of religion, the power of belief, and the future of spirituality in a rapidly changing world? How can religious symbols and narratives be manipulated in modern geopolitical conflicts to construct identity and justify violence? This is not merely a theoretical question. It is a grim reality shaping conflicts across the globe, challenging our conventional understandings of religion as a source of peace and morality. From the Middle East to the United States, religious beliefs are strategically deployed to fuel division and legitimize violence, demanding a critical examination of the weaponization of faith. The weaponization of faith refers to the strategic exploitation of religious beliefs, symbols, and institutions to achieve political objectives, often through coercion, oppression, and bloodshed. This is not a new phenomenon. History is replete with examples of religious wars, persecutions, and inquisitions, where faith served as a pretext for violence and domination. In our contemporary world, however, this weaponization takes on new forms, as religious rhetoric is employed by terrorist organizations to recruit followers, by nationalist movements to justify territorial claims, and by political leaders to consolidate power, revealing a dark side of religious influence. In this section, we will explore the manipulation of YAHWistic symbols and narratives in contemporary geopolitics. We will focus on how different groups construct and weaponize religious identity, examining specific examples of conflicts and movements where religion plays a prominent role. It is crucial to state explicitly that our intent is to remain objective and analytical, avoiding any endorsement of specific political agendas or religious viewpoints. We seek to understand the mechanisms and motivations behind this phenomenon, rather than to pass judgment on any particular faith or community. But how are YAHWistic symbols and narratives being manipulated in contemporary geopolitics to construct identity, justify violence, and advance specific political agendas? And what role do chaos magic and Reconstructionist theology play in deconstructing these weaponized narratives? To answer these questions, we must first understand the concepts of identity construction and narrative control. Identity construction is the process through which individuals and groups create a sense of belonging and distinctiveness through shared beliefs, values, and narratives. Religion often plays a central role in this process, providing individuals with a framework for understanding their place in the world and connecting them to a community of like-minded believers. Religious rituals, symbols, and texts contribute to the formation of a shared religious identity, shaping individual and collective behaviors and attitudes, thereby cementing group cohesion. Narrative control, on the other hand, is the ability to shape and manipulate the stories that people tell themselves about the world, influencing their perceptions, beliefs, and behaviors. Religious narratives can be powerful tools for legitimizing power structures, justifying violence, and mobilizing support for specific causes. Narratives about chosen people, holy wars, or divine mandates have been used to justify conquest, oppression, and persecution throughout history, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of conflict and animosity. Just as skilled storytellers can captivate and persuade their audiences, those who control religious narratives can wield immense influence over the hearts and minds of believers. But we cannot forget the power of symbolism. Religious symbols have the power to evoke emotions, inspire loyalty, and mobilize action. These symbols can be manipulated to create a sense of solidarity within a group and to demonize those who are perceived as enemies. Consider the cross, the Star of David, or the crescent moon, each a potent symbol of religious identity and political allegiance, capable of inspiring both profound devotion and intense hatred. These symbols act as shorthand for complex beliefs and values, allowing for the rapid mobilization of emotions and attitudes, often bypassing rational thought and critical analysis. Having established the core concepts of identity construction, narrative control, and the power of symbolism, let us now turn to specific examples of how these concepts are applied in the manipulation of Yahwistic symbols and narratives. By examining concrete cases, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complex interplay between religion, politics, and violence in the contemporary world. Where can we see this play out in modern conflicts? Consider the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Religious narratives about the Promised Land, the chosen people, and the Temple Mount are used by both Israelis and Palestinians to justify their claims to the same territory. These narratives contribute to the perpetuation of the conflict and the demonization of the other side, creating a seemingly intractable cycle of violence. For example, both sides invoke biblical passages and archaeological evidence to support their competing claims to Jerusalem, each interpreting the historical record in a way that reinforces their own narrative and delegitimizes the others. The conflict is not simply about land. It is about identity, belonging, and the perceived fulfillment of ancient prophecies, demonstrating the potent influence of religious narratives on political realities. Another potent example can be found in Christian nationalism in the United States. Christian nationalist movements in the United States use Yahwistic symbols and narratives to promote a particular vision of American identity and to advance their political agenda. These movements often invoke biblical justifications for conservative social policies, such as opposition to abortion, same-sex marriage, and immigration, claiming a divine mandate for their political beliefs. Phrases like "one nation under God" and "in God we trust" are used to promote a particular vision of American identity, often excluding those who do not share their religious beliefs or cultural values. This demonstrates how religious rhetoric can be used to create a sense of national identity that is both exclusive and divisive, fueling social and political polarization. And we cannot ignore the role of ISIS. Extremist groups like ISIS use selective interpretations of Islamic texts and symbols to justify their violent actions and to recruit followers. ISIS portrays itself as a defender of true Islam against the corrupt and apostate regimes of the modern world, invoking apocalyptic prophecies and promises of paradise for those who fight in their cause. ISIS propaganda materials are replete with references to the Quran, the Hadith, and other Islamic texts, selectively interpreted to justify acts of terrorism, beheadings, and other atrocities, underscoring the dangers of religious extremism and the manipulation of sacred texts. But are there ways to counter these narratives? Analyzing these examples, we see how Yahwistic symbols and narratives are manipulated to construct identity, justify violence, and advance specific political agendas in contemporary geopolitics. Common themes and patterns emerge across these different contexts, including the use of selective interpretations of religious texts, the demonization of the other, and the invocation of divine mandates. But what can we do to challenge these destructive forces? As we have seen, chaos magic and Reconstructionist theology may provide potential responses to these weaponized faith systems. Chaos magicians can use techniques like sigil magic, godform assumption, and ritual deconstruction to challenge and dismantle weaponized narratives, breaking free from limiting beliefs and reclaiming their personal agency by creating sigils that represent alternative narratives of peace, reconciliation, and interfaith dialogue. Similarly, Reconstructionist theologians can reimagine YAHWEHism in ways that promote peace, justice, and inclusivity, reconstructing ancient rituals and narratives to emphasize themes of compassion, forgiveness, and social responsibility, reinterpreting biblical passages that promote violence or exclusion in light of modern ethical values. What remains to be asked, however, is what ethical considerations must inform any attempt to reinterpret religious traditions in the face of weaponized faith, a question we will explore next. Imagine a news report showing demonstrators brandishing signs adorned with religious symbols, their faces contorted in anger as they chant slogans invoking divine retribution. Are these symbols being wielded to inspire hope and unity, or to incite division and hatred? The line between faith and fanaticism has become increasingly blurred, as religious symbols and narratives are strategically deployed to fuel political agendas and justify acts of violence, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable reality of the weaponization of faith in the modern world. The increasing role of faith in international relations and conflicts is not always a force for good. The weaponization of faith is not merely the manipulation of religious beliefs for political gain. It is the harnessing of the sacred for profane purposes, the exploitation of spiritual longing to justify worldly ambitions. It encompasses a range of tactics, from the selective interpretation of religious texts to the demonization of outgroups, all aimed at mobilizing support for specific political objectives. Religious justifications for wars, persecution, and discrimination have been a recurring feature of human history, from the Crusades to the Holocaust, and continue to fuel conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, and beyond. Contemporary issues such as religiously motivated terrorism and the rise of religious nationalism are not aberrations, but rather manifestations of this deeper phenomenon. In the following analysis, our focus will be on understanding the mechanisms through which Yahwistic symbols are weaponized, not on taking sides in any particular conflict or endorsing any specific religious viewpoint. We aim to promote critical thinking and nuanced understanding, recognizing that the relationship between religion and politics is complex and multifaceted. We do not seek to demonize any particular group or belief system, but rather to illuminate the ways in which religious symbols and narratives can be manipulated to serve political agendas. The intent is to foster a more informed and ethical engagement with religion in the public sphere, and prevent the kindling of any unnecessary hate. How, then, can understanding the manipulation of Yahwistic symbols in geopolitics help us develop more nuanced perspectives on identity, conflict, and the relationship between religion and power? And what are the ethical responsibilities that arise when engaging with such potent symbols in a world fraught with religious tension? These are the questions we must grapple with as we delve deeper into the complexities of weaponized faith. To understand the weaponization of Yahwistic symbols, it is crucial to first examine the underlying processes of identity construction and narrative control. Identity construction is the process through which individuals and groups create a sense of belonging, purpose, and distinctiveness through shared beliefs, values, and narratives, a sense of us that inherently defines a them. Religious narratives often play a central role in defining who belongs to the in-group and who is excluded from it, creating a powerful sense of solidarity and shared destiny among believers. Religious rituals, symbols, and traditions reinforce this sense of collective identity, shaping individual and collective behaviors and attitudes. Consider the concept of the chosen people in Judaism, or the righteous remnant in Christianity. These narratives create a sense of superiority and exclusivity, fostering a belief that one's own group is divinely favored and that others are less worthy or even damned. Narrative control, on the other hand, involves the ability to shape and manipulate the stories that people tell themselves about the world, influencing their perceptions, beliefs, and behaviors. This often involves the techniques of demonization and justification. Demonization involves portraying the enemy as evil, subhuman, or a threat to the moral order, making it easier to dehumanize them and justify violence against them. Justification, conversely, involves framing violence as a necessary or divinely ordained act, a means of defending one's faith, community, or values. Religious narratives about infidels, heretics, or enemies of God have been used throughout history to justify persecution, conquest, and genocide. Consider the concept of jihad in Islam, which has been interpreted in various ways, ranging from a personal struggle for spiritual growth to a call for holy war against non-believers, underscoring the power of narrative control in shaping religious attitudes and behaviors. Religious symbols possess a unique psychological power, capable of evoking deep-seated emotions, memories, and associations. These symbols can bypass rational thought and tap into primal instincts, making people more susceptible to manipulation. Religious music, art, and rituals can create a sense of collective identity and emotional solidarity, strengthening group cohesion and making individuals more willing to sacrifice themselves for the cause. The cross, the Star of David, the crescent moon, these are not mere decorations. They are potent symbols that resonate with centuries of religious meaning, capable of inspiring both profound devotion and intense hatred, depending on how they are presented. In short, identity construction and narrative control, fueled by the power of symbolism, are key mechanisms through which Yahwistic symbols are weaponized in geopolitics. By constructing exclusive identities, demonizing outgroups, and justifying violence through religious narratives, political actors can mobilize support for their agendas and perpetuate cycles of conflict. But how do these concepts play out in the real world? To illustrate these concepts, let us turn to specific examples of the weaponization of Yahwistic symbols in geopolitics. First, consider the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where contested sacred sites play a central role in fueling the conflict. The Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif, revered by Jews as the site of the ancient temples and by Muslims as the location of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is a focal point of religious and political tension. Religious narratives about the historical and spiritual significance of this site are used to justify competing claims of ownership and control, contributing to a cycle of violence and mistrust. Israeli rhetoric often emphasizes the historical connection of the Jewish people to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, citing biblical passages and archaeological evidence to support their claims. Palestinian rhetoric, on the other hand, emphasizes the Islamic significance of the Haram al-Sharif and accuses Israel of attempting to undermine Muslim control over the site. This competing rhetoric leads to conflict over holy sites. Next, we must turn our attention to Christian nationalism in the United States, where the concept of dominionism plays a significant role. Dominionism, the belief that Christians have a divine mandate to control all aspects of society, is used to justify political activism and to promote a particular vision of American identity. This ideology interprets biblical passages to support its claims, arguing that Christians have a responsibility to take dominion over the earth and to establish a society based on biblical principles. Christian nationalist leaders often invoke biblical language and appeal to religious authority to advocate for conservative social policies, such as restricting abortion access, opposing same-sex marriage, and limiting immigration. This use of religious rhetoric contributes to political polarization and the marginalization of those who do not share their religious beliefs or cultural values. Finally, we can look at ISIS and their use of apocalyptic narratives to recruit followers and justify their violent actions. ISIS selectively interprets Islamic texts to create a vision of a coming end-times battle between good and evil, in which they play a central role. ISIS propaganda materials invoke prophecies about the Mahdi, the Dajjal Antichrist, and the Final Judgment, presenting their actions as part of a divinely ordained plan to purify the world and establish a global caliphate. This apocalyptic narrative is used to justify acts of terrorism, beheadings, and other atrocities, attracting recruits from around the world who believe they are participating in a cosmic struggle between good and evil. How do all these narratives connect? Analyzing these examples, we can identify common patterns in the weaponization of Yahwistic symbols and narratives. The role of identity construction, narrative control, and emotional manipulation in perpetuating conflict and justifying violence is apparent in each case. Selective interpretations of religious texts, demonization of the other, and the invocation of divine mandates are recurring themes that underscore the dangers of religious extremism and the manipulation of sacred symbols. But what if there was a way to flip the script, to deconstruct these weaponized narratives and reimagine Yahwistic traditions in ways that promote peace and understanding? Chaos magic, with its emphasis on personal agency and the deconstruction of limiting beliefs, offers one potential approach. Chaos magicians can use sigil magic to disrupt and dismantle weaponized narratives, creating sigils that challenge divisive ideologies, promote critical thinking, and foster empathy. Sigil warfare, the use of sigils to counteract negative energies and intentions, can be employed to undermine the power of hate speech and propaganda, replacing them with messages of peace and reconciliation. Sigils promoting peace, reconciliation, and interfaith dialogue can be actively deployed within relevant online and offline communities, countering the spread of hate and division. Reconstructionist theology offers another avenue for reimagining Yahwistic traditions in ways that promote peace, justice, and inclusivity. By recovering and reinterpreting ancient rituals and narratives, Reconstructionist theologians can emphasize themes of compassion, forgiveness, and social responsibility. Biblical passages that promote violence or exclusion can be reinterpreted in light of modern ethical values, while ancient festivals can be reconstructed to celebrate diversity and interfaith harmony. But can new narratives alone change the perception and utilization of faith? Modern groups and individuals can also create their own narratives and traditions, reinterpreting existing views and creating new frameworks that counter previous conflicts. The ethics of appropriating religious symbols and narratives from other cultures must, however, be carefully considered. Such deconstruction, reimagining, and creation of new traditions can lead to a better understanding of each other, highlighting areas of social tension and providing paths to understanding. But we are only scratching the surface. What ethical considerations must inform any attempt to reinterpret religious traditions in the face of weaponized faith? The power of interpretation, understanding the context and intent, is paramount when looking at religious texts and symbols. The same symbol can be used for both positive and negative purposes, depending on the context in which it is used and the intentions of those who are using it. Avoiding dogmatism and extremism in any religious or political context requires critical thinking, intellectual humility, and a willingness to question one's own beliefs and assumptions. Awareness of one's own biases and prejudices is also crucial. By promoting dialogue and understanding, we can see the potential for interfaith dialogue and cross-cultural understanding to bridge divides and promote peace. Empathy, respect, and a willingness to listen to different perspectives can combat the modern weaponized faith systems in the modern political landscape. As we conclude this section, let us briefly summarize the key reinterpretations of Yahweh we have explored, emphasizing the diversity of perspectives and the ongoing evolution of religious beliefs. The power of individuals and communities to shape and reshape their understanding of God cannot be overstated. But the theme of malleability and political manipulation has also been present, further demonstrating the need for critical awareness, responsible interpretation, and ethical engagement. Let us challenge our assumptions about religion, politics, and the nature of belief, and encourage respectful dialogue with those who hold different perspectives. What have we discovered about the modern political landscape? In a world where religious symbols are increasingly weaponized, how can we cultivate a more nuanced, compassionate, and ethical approach to faith, identity, and the quest for meaning? That is the question we will continue to pursue as we continue our quest. Can belief actively shape Yahweh, or is the divine immutable? This question challenges conventional assumptions about the nature of God, beckoning us to explore contemporary interpretations that dare to reimagine the very essence of the divine. This exploration will discuss Reconstructionist theology as a modern theological movement seeking to revive ancient pagan religions in a contemporary context, urging us to consider the power of human agency in shaping religious understanding. Before we delve deeper into these contemporary interpretations, let us first define chaos magic. Chaos magic is a postmodern magical paradigm emphasizing personal experience, experimentation, and the rejection of dogma. Central to this practice is the concept of sigils, symbols created with specific intentions, acting as conduits for focused energy and belief to manifest desired outcomes. It's a system where personal gnosis and subjective experience take precedence over established traditions. In this section, we will analyze how chaos magicians and Reconstructionist theologians engage with Yahweh, emphasizing their unique perspectives and practices. It is vital to state our objectivity. We will analyze these reinterpretations from scholarly and esoteric lenses, seeking understanding rather than promotion. We'll explore these approaches with a critical eye, examining both their potential and their limitations. How, then, do chaos magicians and Reconstructionist theologians reimagine and utilize Yahweh within their frameworks? What does this reveal about the nature of belief, the construction of identity, and the very idea of deity in the modern world? This is what we shall explore. To understand these contemporary approaches, we must first clarify the core concepts that underpin them. Chaos magic, as mentioned before, centers around the idea of belief as a tool. Its key tenets include a rejection of fixed pantheons, a focus on personal gnosis, direct, subjective experience of the divine, and an embrace of absurdity as a means to break free from limiting belief systems. In chaos magic, belief is not a matter of blind faith, but a consciously chosen instrument to achieve desired outcomes. Reconstructionist theology, in contrast, emphasizes historical accuracy, cultural authenticity, and religious innovation. Its goals include reconstructing ancient religious practices based on archaeological evidence, historical texts, and comparative religion. Its approach to texts, rituals, deities, ethics, and social views centers around historical recovery and recontextualization within a modern ethical framework. Reconstructionists seek to revive ancient practices in a way that is both historically informed and ethically sound. While seemingly disparate, chaos magic and Reconstructionist theology share some common ground. Both challenge religious norms and seek to create more personalized and meaningful spiritual experiences. However, they diverge in their views on accuracy and authority. Chaos magic prioritizes personal experience and experimentation, while Reconstructionist theology emphasizes historical accuracy and cultural authenticity. To recap, chaos magic treats belief as a malleable tool for personal empowerment, while Reconstructionist theology seeks to revive ancient religious practices with historical accuracy. How do these seemingly contradictory frameworks come together in the re-envisioning of such an established deity as Yahweh? Let us turn to the practical applications of these concepts. How, then, do chaos magicians wield belief to reshape the very nature of Yahweh? The answer can be found in the intentional creation of thought forms. Chaos magicians often work with servitors, entities created through intention and belief, imbued with specific attributes and tasks. one might create a YAHWEH servitor, imbuing it with attributes of justice, protection, or even wrath, depending on the magician's specific goals. Creating and activating a YAHWEH servitor involves a multi-step process. It starts with sigil creation, designing a symbolic representation of the servitor's purpose and attributes. This sigil is then charged through ritual invocation, calling upon the desired energies and imbuing the servitor with life force. Energy work, such as visualization and focused intent, further empowers the servitor, setting it into motion to fulfill its designated task. Chaos magicians may also adopt god forms, temporarily embodying the attributes and powers of a deity. Adopting a YAHWEH god form could allow a magician to access specific energies or achieve particular goals, such as invoking divine judgment or experiencing a sense of transcendent power. Techniques to enter the YAHWEH god form include meditation, visualization, and ritual drama, immersing oneself in the symbolic imagery and emotional resonance of the deity. The chaos magic view of YAHWEH is radically malleable, shaped by the magician's belief and intention. This departs significantly from traditional monotheistic views of God as an immutable, all-powerful being. What, though, are the ethical implications of such an approach? Empowerment versus manipulation becomes a key consideration. In summary, chaos magic approaches YAHWEH as a tool for personal empowerment and experimentation, a malleable force shaped by belief and intention. Now, let us turn to the Reconstructionist perspective, where the emphasis lies on historical accuracy and cultural authenticity. Reconstructionist theologians seek to revive ancient Yahwistic rituals, drawing on archaeological evidence, biblical texts, and comparative religion. This involves meticulously researching and reconstructing ancient practices, attempting to recreate them as accurately as possible within a contemporary context. Challenges abound, given the limited and often ambiguous nature of the available sources. Reconstructionists also explore reimagining YAHWEH within a polytheistic context, recognizing the existence and influence of other deities and spirits. This involves reconstructing the ancient Israelite pantheon, acknowledging deities such as Asherah, Baal, and Mo, who were often associated with YAHWEH in ancient Israelite religion. What, though, are the theological and ethical implications of such a reconstruction? The very foundations of monotheistic belief are challenged. Seeking to revive ancient YAHWEHism in a contemporary context requires careful consideration of historical and cultural authenticity. How does one remain true to the ancient beliefs and practices while reconciling them with modern ethics and values? This tension between historical accuracy and ethical responsibility is a central challenge for Reconstructionist theologians. In short, the Reconstructionist approach to YAHWEH involves historical recovery and religious innovation, seeking to revive ancient practices while grappling with the challenges of historical accuracy and ethical relevance. Now, let us compare these two perspectives, highlighting their similarities and differences. Comparing chaos magic and Reconstructionist approaches reveals a shared emphasis on personal experience, albeit with different orientations. Both challenge monotheistic beliefs, but they do so in fundamentally different ways. Chaos magic deconstructs belief itself, while Reconstructionism seeks to reclaim lost traditions. How, then, might these seemingly disparate perspectives be synthesized? One intriguing possibility lies in combining magical experimentation with historical awareness. Creating a YAHWEH servitor with historically accurate attributes, for example, could provide a powerful synthesis of chaos magic and Reconstructionist theology. However, such a synthesis also presents significant challenges, requiring a deep understanding of both magical principles and historical context. Ethical considerations are paramount in both approaches. The potential for both positive and negative outcomes exists, depending on the practitioner's intentions and the specific methods employed. Personal responsibility, ethical awareness, and respect for different viewpoints are essential. But how can these considerations influence approaches to YAHWEH? Finally, it is crucial to acknowledge how the contemporary political landscape influences approaches to Yahweh. The use of religious symbolism in political conflicts raises profound questions about the relationship between faith, identity, and power. Alternative approaches to faith systems, emphasizing inclusivity, compassion, and social justice, offer a path toward a more peaceful and equitable world. As we reach the end of this section, let us briefly summarize the key reinterpretations of Yahweh we have explored, emphasizing their diversity and ongoing evolution. The theme of Yahweh's malleability, shaped by human belief, intention, and culture, has been a constant thread throughout our discussion. The need for critical awareness and responsible interpretation is paramount. What does the ongoing reinterpretation of Yahweh tell us about religion, belief, and spirituality in a changing world? Let us challenge our assumptions about religion, politics, and the very nature of belief, and encourage respectful dialogue with those who hold different perspectives. What new understandings might emerge from such a dialogue? These are the questions that we must grapple with as we continue our exploration. The lemma presents a stark contrast to traditional monotheism, challenging established notions of divinity and morality. What does the lemma teach about Yahweh? Born from the mind of Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century, the lemma is a spiritual philosophy that synthesizes various occult and religious traditions, drawing from Kabbalah, Gnosticism, Eastern mysticism, and more. Crowley, a figure of immense controversy and undeniable influence, aimed to usher in a new eon of individual freedom and self-realization, a concept that deeply colors its interpretation of religious figures like Yahweh. It's important to clarify that our focus here is not to provide a comprehensive overview of the lemma. That would be a vast undertaking indeed. Rather, we will examine the lemma's unique reinterpretation of Yahweh within the context of its broader theological framework. By understanding how the lemma reimagines this central figure of the Abrahamic faiths, we can gain insight into its core values and its radical challenge to conventional religious thought. How, then, does the lemma reinterpret Yahweh, and what does this reinterpretation reveal about its core values of individual sovereignty, self-transformation, and the rejection of external authority? This question lies at the heart of our exploration. To answer it, we must first understand some of the lemma's foundational concepts, ideas that will serve as a lens through which we can view its unique perspective. At the core of the lemma lies the concept of true will. This is not merely a fleeting desire or a superficial whim, but rather the individual's unique purpose and path in life, aligned with their deepest, most authentic desires and aspirations. It is the compass that guides us towards self-realization, a beacon that illuminates our path through the labyrinth of existence. True will stands in stark contrast to egoic desires, societal expectations, and the imposed morality of external authorities. Discovering and fulfilling one's true will is the primary goal of the lemmic practice, the ultimate expression of individual sovereignty. This concept is encapsulated in the law of the lemma. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. It's a phrase often misunderstood, sometimes deliberately, as a license for hedonism or anarchy. However, this is a profound misinterpretation. The law of the lemma is not an invitation to indulge in every passing fancy, but a call to align oneself with one's true will, to act in accordance with one's deepest purpose. As Crowley himself emphasized, freedom comes with responsibility. The more clearly we understand our true will, the more accountable we become for our actions. Adding another layer of understanding is the lemmic concept of eons. These are historical periods, each characterized by distinct spiritual and cultural energies, like chapters in the grand narrative of human consciousness. The lemma identifies three primary eons: Isis, Osiris, and Horus. The eon of Isis represents a time of matriarchal rule and connection to nature. The eon of Osiris, a period of patriarchal order, law, and sacrifice. The lemma posits that we are now entering the eon of Horus, a time of self-assertion, individuality, and magical awakening, an era that demands a transcendence of the limitations imposed by the previous eons. To recap, true will is the individual's unique purpose. The law of the lemma is the call to align with that purpose, and the eons are the historical contexts that shape our understanding of ourselves and the divine. How do these core concepts color the lemmic interpretations of Yahweh? Let us now turn to Liber al-Vel Legis, the foundational text of the lemma, for insight. Within Liber al-Vel Legis, the Book of the Law, references to Yahweh and other Judeo-Christian figures appear, yet they are consistently reinterpreted within the context of the new eon. A key theme is the rejection of the slave gods of the past, deities who demand subservience, sacrifice, and the suppression of individual will. These slave gods represent the limitations and restrictions that the lemma seeks to transcend. Crowley's commentary on the Book of the Law provides further insight into this reinterpretation. He identifies Yahweh as a representative of the old eon, specifically the eon of Osiris, characterized by law, restriction, and suffering. In Crowley's view, Yahweh embodies the limitations of the rational mind, the constraints of imposed morality, and the suffering inherent in a worldview that emphasizes sin and guilt. The new eon of Horus, in contrast, demands a transcendence of these limitations and an embrace of individual freedom, self-expression, and the pursuit of one's true will, a radical departure from the established dogma. The ethical implications of this reinterpretation are profound. It leads to a rejection of traditional Judeo-Christian morality, with its emphasis on obedience to external authority and adherence to fixed rules. The lemma embraces a more individualistic and self-directed ethical framework, where the only sin is that which hinders the fulfillment of one's true will. As Crowley famously stated, "There is no law beyond do what thou wilt." How then does the lemma encourage moving beyond restrictive views toward freedom and a rejection of imposed ethics? The answer lies in self-knowledge, self-awareness, and a commitment to one's true will. The lemma emphasizes the importance of questioning all assumptions, challenging all limitations, and embracing the full potential of one's being. This is not a path for the faint of heart, but a journey of profound self-discovery and personal transformation. How might modern Thelemites incorporate Yahweh and other Judeo-Christian figures into their rituals and practices, not as objects of worship, but as symbols to be deconstructed and reinterpreted in the pursuit of self-knowledge and spiritual growth? A Thelemite might, for example, invoke Yahweh as a representation of the ego or the limitations of the rational mind, then perform a ritual to dismantle these limitations and embrace a more expansive state of consciousness. Modern interpretations of Yahweh within the lemma are diverse, reflecting the individualistic nature of this spiritual philosophy. Some Thelemites may view Yahweh as a symbol of the ego or the limitations of the rational mind, while others may see him as a source of creative energy or transformative power. The key is not to accept any interpretation blindly, but to engage with these symbols in a conscious and intentional way, always guided by one's true will. It is, however, important to address the ethical considerations involved in appropriating and reinterpreting religious symbols from other traditions. Respect, responsibility, and a clear understanding of the symbolic meaning of these figures are paramount. Appropriation without understanding can lead to cultural insensitivity and a superficial understanding of complex spiritual traditions. The lemma emphasizes the importance of engaging with these symbols in a way that is both respectful and transformative. How do these thelemic beliefs reflect a modern need to challenge historical views? In an era of increasing individualism, skepticism toward traditional authority, and a growing awareness of the diversity of human experience, the lemma offers a framework for reimagining the divine in a way that aligns with these values. Its emphasis on individual sovereignty, self-transformation, and the rejection of external authority resonates with many modern seekers who are looking for a more personalized and meaningful spiritual path. But is this individualized path simply hubris in disguise? In some, the lemma's reinterpretation of Yahweh is radical, challenging conventional monotheistic beliefs and emphasizing individual sovereignty, self-transformation, and the rejection of external authority. It is a testament to the ongoing evolution of religious thought, shaped by human needs, desires, and cultural contexts. It is also a potent reminder that there is no single, definitive interpretation of God. As we contemplate belief, we must question our own assumptions about God, religion, and the nature of belief. Embrace the diverse perspectives and interpretations presented, and confront the complexity and ambiguity of the divine. What have we learned about individual roles in interpreting the divine? The lemma suggests that we are not merely passive recipients of religious dogma, but active participants in the ongoing creation of meaning. Given these diverse and often conflicting interpretations of Yahweh, what are the implications for understanding the role of religion in shaping identity, fueling conflict, and influencing geopolitical power dynamics? This question, though vast and complex, is essential to understanding the enduring power of religious belief in the modern world, a theme we shall explore in the sections to come. Isn't it ironic that a book considered by many to be divinely authored was, in fact, a complex tapestry woven from multiple distinct sources? Challenging the traditional view of singular authorship, academic scholars have long recognized that the Hebrew Bible, especially the Pentateuch, is a composite work, a mosaic of narratives, poems, and laws originating from different periods and reflecting diverse theological perspectives. This understanding comes primarily from the application of source criticism and the documentary hypothesis. Let's define these terms. Source criticism is a method of biblical analysis that seeks to identify the different sources that were combined to create the final text. The documentary hypothesis, a specific application of source criticism, proposes that the Pentateuch was compiled from 4 main independent sources, often referred to as J, E, P, and D. Key figures like Julius Wellhausen championed these methods, revolutionizing biblical studies. It's important to note that our focus here is not to provide a comprehensive defense or critique of source criticism and the documentary hypothesis that would require a series of videos in itself. Instead, we will focus on how these methods shed light on the evolution of Yahweh's character and attributes as different sources describe him. How do source criticism and the documentary hypothesis help us understand the different ways in which Yahweh was portrayed by different authors and at different times in ancient Israel's history? That is the question we hope to shed light on here. Let us now turn to the core concepts of the documentary hypothesis, the J, E, P, and D sources. Each source possesses distinct characteristics, including its preferred name for God, its theological emphasis, and its geographical focus. Understanding these characteristics is crucial for discerning the different portraits of Yahweh that emerge from the Hebrew Bible. First, we have the J source, often referred to as the Yahwist. The J source is characterized by its anthropomorphic depictions of Yahweh, portraying him as a more human-like deity who walks and talks with people, displays emotions, and even makes mistakes. The J source consistently uses the name Yahweh from the very beginning of creation, emphasizing a personal and intimate relationship between God and humanity. The J source also tends to focus on the kingdom of Judah and its traditions. A prime example of the J source's anthropomorphic portrayal of Yahweh can be found in Genesis 3, where Yahweh walks in the Garden of Eden and converses with Adam and Eve. Next, we have the E source, known as the Elohist. The E source tends to depict God in a more abstract and transcendent manner, communicating through dreams, angels, and prophets rather than direct, physical interaction. The E source uses the name Elohim until the revelation to Moses in Exodus 3, where God reveals his name as Yahweh. The E source often focuses on the kingdom of Israel and its traditions. An example of the E source's more distant portrayal of God can be seen in Genesis 22, where God tests Abraham's faith by commanding him to sacrifice his son Isaac, but then intervenes through an angel. Then there's the P source, the priestly source. The P source is characterized by its emphasis on ritual, law, and genealogy. It presents a more transcendent and orderly depiction of God, emphasizing his holiness and his role as the creator and sustainer of the universe. The P source is particularly concerned with priestly matters, such as sacrifices, festivals, and the proper conduct of worship. It emphasizes social order. The creation account in Genesis 1, with its structured and systematic presentation of God's creative acts, is attributed to the P source. The P source is also responsible for much of the legal material in the books of Leviticus and Numbers. Finally, we have the D source, the Deuteronomist. The D source is characterized by its emphasis on covenant, centralization of worship, and the importance of obedience to God's law. It presents Yahweh as a demanding and jealous God who requires exclusive devotion and punishes those who disobey his commands. The Book of Deuteronomy, with its emphasis on the covenant between Yahweh and Israel, its call for centralization of worship in Jerusalem, and its warnings against idolatry, is attributed to the D source. Deuteronomy 6:4-5, the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," is a central passage in the D source, emphasizing the exclusive worship of Yahweh. To recap, the J source presents an anthropomorphic Yahweh, the E source a more distant Elohim, the P source an orderly and law-giving God, and the D source a demanding and jealous Yahweh. How do these differing portrayals shape our understanding of Yahweh's evolution? Let us now turn to a more detailed examination of these differing portraits. The J source, as we've discussed, paints Yahweh as a more human-like deity, intimately involved in the lives of his people. He walks in the Garden of Eden, converses with Adam and Eve, and even displays emotions like jealousy and anger. In Genesis 6, Yahweh expresses regret for creating humanity, leading him to send the flood. In Exodus 34:14, Yahweh is described as a jealous God, demanding exclusive devotion. These examples reveal a deity with very human qualities, a stark contrast to the more transcendent portrayals found in other sources. The E source, in contrast, presents Yahweh as more distant and transcendent, communicating through intermediaries like dreams, angels, and prophets. In Genesis 20, God warns Abimelech in a dream not to touch Sarah. In Exodus 3, God appears to Moses in a burning bush and reveals his name as Yahweh. These examples suggest a deity who is not directly involved in human affairs, but rather works through intermediaries. The P source portrays Yahweh as an orderly and law-giving God, emphasizing ritual purity and social order. Genesis 1, the creation account attributed to the P source, presents God as creating the world in a structured and systematic way, bringing order out of chaos. Leviticus, largely attributed to the P source, outlines detailed laws and regulations governing ritual purity, sacrifices, and festivals. These examples reveal a deity who is concerned with maintaining order and holiness in the world. The D source presents Yahweh as a demanding and jealous God, emphasizing the importance of exclusive devotion and obedience to his law. Deuteronomy repeatedly warns against idolatry and calls for the destruction of pagan altars and images. Deuteronomy 28 outlines the blessings that will come to Israel if they obey Yahweh's commands and the curses that will befall them if they disobey. These examples suggest a deity who demands complete allegiance and punishes those who stray from his path. But what portrait of Yahweh emerges when these diverse views are taken together? How can we interpret the gaps and contradictions between these differing portrayals? Perhaps the answer lies in viewing these sources as different facets of a complex and multifaceted deity, each reflecting the needs, desires, and perspectives of different communities within ancient Israel. Perhaps they represent different stages in Israel's evolving relationship with the divine. This brings us to the syncretistic elements in the portrayal of Yahweh. Source criticism reveals syncretistic elements in the portrayal of Yahweh, suggesting that different sources may have incorporated beliefs and practices from other ancient Near Eastern religions. The potential influence of Canaanite mythology on the J source is a prime example. The stories of Yahweh battling chaos monsters like Leviathan and Rahab may be derived from Canaanite myths about Baal's battles with Yam, the god of the sea. The Ark of the Covenant may have been influenced by similar objects in other ancient Near Eastern religions, serving as a portable throne for the deity. The documentary hypothesis supports the idea that monotheism in ancient Israel developed gradually over time. The different sources reflect different stages in this evolution, from henotheism to monolatry to monotheism. The E-source, with its use of the term Elohim, a plural form for God, may reflect an earlier stage in which the existence of other gods was still acknowledged. The D-source, with its emphasis on exclusive devotion to Yahweh, represents a later stage in which monolatry became more firmly established. It is also important to note how the different portrayals of Yahweh in the J, E, P, and D sources reflect the political and social context in which they were written. Different groups and factions in ancient Israel may have used different images of Yahweh to promote their own agendas and interests. The J source, with its focus on the Kingdom of Judah, may have been used to legitimize the Davidic dynasty and its claims to power. The D source, with its call for centralization of worship in Jerusalem, may have been used to promote the interests of the Jerusalem priesthood. In all of this, what we see is synthesis. The diversity in Yahweh's characteristics can be explained by the process of synthesis, whereby different traditions and beliefs were combined and integrated over time. The final portrait of Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible is a composite one, reflecting the contributions of many different authors and communities. In summary, source criticism and the documentary hypothesis have revolutionized our understanding of the Hebrew Bible and the evolution of Yahweh. They have revealed the diversity of perspectives and the lack of a single, definitive interpretation of God. They challenge traditional beliefs about the Bible's authorship, authority, and inerrancy. These findings have the potential to provoke both controversy and deeper understanding. What relevance does modern scholarship have in modern issues of identity, narrative, and meaning? How is the concept of deity used to enforce social order? Further, how can we use this scholarship to look at modern geopolitical issues involving religious conflict? Given these academic perspectives, how do they help us understand the ongoing process of interpreting and reinterpreting Yahweh in contemporary religion and culture? This question, though complex, is essential to understanding the enduring power of religious belief in the modern world. Imagine a modern conflict, a struggle over land and resources, where both sides claim divine mandate from Yahweh to justify their actions. How can we, as ethically conscious individuals, grapple with the complexities of applying ancient religious texts to such a contemporary ethical quagmire? Isn't it challenging to reconcile ancient pronouncements with modern sensibilities? Across the modern world, different groups interpret Yahweh's justice, mercy, and love in profoundly divergent ways, resulting in a vast spectrum of ethical positions. On one end, we see conservative perspectives emphasizing traditional values, strict adherence to religious law, and a focus on individual responsibility. These perspectives often translate into political stances against abortion, same-sex marriage, and certain forms of social welfare. On the other end, we encounter liberal interpretations prioritizing social justice, compassion for the marginalized, and environmental stewardship. These viewpoints often lead to support for policies addressing poverty, promoting LGBTQ rights, and combating climate change. The theological underpinnings of these positions differ drastically, with conservative interpretations often emphasizing Yahweh's judgment and the need for moral purity, while liberal interpretations highlight Yahweh's love, forgiveness, and concern for the oppressed. From these differing views arise concrete ethical dilemmas. What role should religious belief play in political decision-making, especially in pluralistic societies? How do we balance religious freedom with the pursuit of social justice when these values seem to conflict? Can religious arguments ever be used to justify discrimination or violence? And if so, how should society respond? And perhaps most fundamentally, how do we reconcile deeply held religious beliefs with the findings of modern science, particularly in areas like evolution and climate change? It's clear that there are no easy answers, and these questions require careful consideration, empathy, and a commitment to ethical reasoning. In short, the challenges posed by these divergent interpretations call for critical thinking, a deep sense of empathy, and a firm commitment to ethical reasoning. But if the ethical challenges are complex, the political implications are even more so, as we will soon discover. How is faith manipulated to justify political agendas, often leading to profound social division and conflict? Across the globe, Yahwistic symbols and narratives are strategically deployed to construct and reinforce political identities, both within and between nations. Consider, for example, the use of biblical prophecy in some political movements to justify specific policy decisions related to Israel. On one hand, some groups interpret biblical texts as a divine endorsement of Israeli territorial claims, leading to unwavering support for Israeli policies, regardless of their impact on Palestinians. On the other hand, other groups view these same texts through a lens of social justice, emphasizing the need for compassion and equality for all people in the region, including Palestinians. This divide is not merely theological. It translates directly into political action, shaping voting patterns, influencing foreign policy decisions, and even fueling violence. Within Yahwistic traditions, we also see a profound tension between nationalist and globalist perspectives. Some groups interpret Yahweh's will as primarily concerned with the well-being and security of their own nation, often advocating for policies that prioritize national interests above international cooperation. This perspective often draws on narratives of chosenness and divine favor, portraying their nation as uniquely blessed and tasked with a special mission in the world. Conversely, other groups emphasize Yahweh's universal love and concern for all humanity, advocating for policies that promote global cooperation, environmental protection, and social justice on a global scale. These differing viewpoints shape attitudes toward international treaties, immigration policies, and foreign aid, often leading to sharp political divisions within and between nations. Even within Yahwistic institutions, religious narratives can be weaponized as instruments of social control. Consider how certain religious leaders use their authority to shape public opinion on political issues, often reinforcing existing power structures and suppressing dissent. Narratives about divinely ordained hierarchies, the importance of obedience to authority, and the dangers of questioning tradition can be used to discourage critical thinking and maintain social order. While such narratives may provide a sense of stability and cohesion for some, they can also be used to silence marginalized voices and perpetuate injustice. The potential for abuse of power within religious institutions is a perennial concern, requiring constant vigilance and a commitment to transparency and accountability. Therefore, weaponized faith and the exploitation of Yahwistic symbols and narratives serve to both forge identity and assert social control. These factors are not limited to individual nations, as we'll soon see. How do these forces manifest on the geopolitical stage, shaping international relations and fueling global conflicts? Religious differences are often exploited to fuel violence and division in contemporary geopolitical conflicts. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with its deep-rooted religious claims and counterclaims, serves as a stark example. Both sides invoke Yahwistic narratives to justify their territorial claims and political aspirations, leading to a seemingly intractable cycle of violence and recrimination. Similarly, conflicts in the Middle East, such as the wars in Iraq and Syria, are often exacerbated by sectarian divisions between Sunni and Shia Muslims, each claiming to represent the true interpretation of Yahweh's will. These conflicts are not solely about religion, of course, but religious identity often serves as a powerful mobilizing force, fueling hatred and justifying atrocities. Yahwistic values and beliefs also exert a powerful influence on international relations, shaping foreign policy decisions and diplomatic strategies. The United States, for example, often frames its foreign policy in moral terms, drawing on religious narratives about freedom, democracy, and the fight against evil. Religious organizations also play a significant role in humanitarian aid, peacemaking efforts, and international advocacy, often working to alleviate suffering, promote human rights, and mediate conflicts. However, the influence of Yahwistic values on international relations is not always benign. Religious beliefs can also be used to justify interventionism, support authoritarian regimes, and promote narrow national interests. The rise of religious nationalism as a global phenomenon poses a significant challenge to international relations and democratic values. From the United States to India to Russia, we see a resurgence of political movements that seek to fuse religious identity with national identity, often at the expense of minority rights and international cooperation. Economic inequality, cultural anxieties, and the erosion of traditional social structures all contribute to the rise of religious nationalism. But whatever its causes, religious nationalism has the potential to destabilize international relations, undermine democratic institutions, and fuel violence and discrimination. Given these geopolitical manifestations of Yahwistic religions, characterized by a complex interplay of conflict and cooperation, how can we promote peace, understanding, and ethical engagement in a religiously diverse world? What paths forward can we identify and pursue? Promoting interfaith dialogue is a crucial tool for bridging divides and fostering mutual understanding between different religious traditions. Effective interfaith dialogue is not about compromising one's own beliefs or seeking a lowest common denominator. Instead, it is about creating a space for respectful listening, genuine empathy, and a willingness to learn from others. Successful interfaith initiatives, such as the Elijah Interfaith Institute, have fostered cooperation on issues ranging from environmental protection to poverty alleviation, demonstrating the power of religious communities to work together for the common good. Cultivating critical religious literacy is an essential skill for navigating a religiously diverse world. Understanding the history, beliefs, and practices of different religions, as well as the potential for religious narratives to be manipulated for political purposes, empowers individuals to think critically about religion and to resist the forces of division and extremism. Developing your own critical thinking skills and questioning assumptions about religion will help you navigate the complexities of religious pluralism and to engage with others in a respectful and constructive manner. As we move forward, let us not ignore different ethical frameworks for engaging with religious diversity. The Golden Rule, with its emphasis on treating others as you would like to be treated, provides a simple but powerful guide for ethical conduct. The principle of reciprocity, which emphasizes mutually beneficial relationships, encourages cooperation and collaboration across religious divides. The concept of universal human rights, which recognizes the inherent dignity and worth of every human being, provides a foundation for protecting the rights of religious minorities and promoting equality for all. And the ethic of care, which prioritizes compassion and empathy in ethical decision-making, encourages us to respond to the suffering of others, regardless of their religious beliefs. So, in addressing these factors, what political solutions exist to mitigate the negative impacts of weaponized faith and promote peaceful coexistence? Exploring different models of governance that protect religious freedom while also preventing religious extremism is one route. Another might be creating avenues for international organization that are not attached to any particular nationalized identity, but we are just scratching the surface of these possibilities now. And so we arrive at our synthesis. We've explored Yahweh, malleable across the ages, and we've examined Yahweh in a complex world. The evolution of Yahweh's image over time, the diversity of interpretations across different traditions, the potential for both good and evil in religion, and the ongoing need for critical thinking, empathy, and ethical engagement all are key to remember. But it all comes down to responsibility. As individuals and communities, we must engage with religious beliefs and practices in a thoughtful and ethical manner, recognizing the power of religion to shape both individual lives and global affairs. Narratives construct meaning for everyone. This is our common condition. Therefore, let us all be willing to question our own assumptions about God, religion, and the world around us. Let's encourage each other to continue exploring the complexities of religious history and to embrace the ongoing quest for meaning. We end with a final, pressing question. Can humanity harness the power of belief to create a more just, peaceful, and compassionate world? Or will religious divisions continue to fuel conflict and division? What role do you play in this unfolding narrative? Imagine a world embroiled in conflict, where each faction firmly believes their cause is divinely ordained by Yahweh, leading to devastating consequences. How can we, as moral agents, reconcile such conflicting claims of divine justification with our own innate ethical compass? Doesn't it seem impossible to apply ancient texts to complex modern moral problems? In our modern world, interpretations of Yahweh's attributes justice, mercy, love, and wrath have become highly selective, weaponized to support pre-existing ethical positions. Consider the stark contrast between conservative and liberal perspectives on wealth distribution. Some conservatives, citing passages about personal responsibility and the condemnation of laziness, argue against expansive social welfare programs. Conversely, liberals often emphasize Yahweh's concern for the poor and marginalized, pointing to biblical mandates for charity and communal sharing. Biblical passages become battlegrounds, each side wielding carefully chosen verses to bolster their case, seemingly oblivious to the broader context and potential for misinterpretation. Are we truly hearing the divine voice, or simply projecting our own biases onto the ancient texts? Several ethical dilemmas arise from these conflicting interpretations. What happens when divine command theory, the belief that morality is based on God's commands, is used to justify actions that strike us as inherently unjust or cruel? History overflows with examples of atrocities committed in the name of God, each justified by appeals to divine authority. How do we, then, reconcile faith and reason? Is it possible to harmonize our religious beliefs with scientific evidence and philosophical ethics, or must we choose between them? And what about balancing justice and mercy? In the criminal justice system, for example, do we prioritize punishment and retribution, or rehabilitation and forgiveness? Depending on our interpretation of Yahweh's character, our answers to these questions will vary widely, leading to profound disagreements and social divisions. In essence, these ethical challenges highlight the imperative for critical thinking, empathy, and a commitment to ethical reasoning that transcends simple appeals to religious authority. But the ethical challenges are just the start. How is the very idea of faith manipulated to push a political agenda, so often creating a climate of social division and conflict? Religious symbols and narratives are potent tools for constructing political identities, forging in-groups and demonizing out-groups. Consider the rise of Christian nationalism in the United States, where religious rhetoric is strategically employed to mobilize voters, promote conservative policies, and assert cultural dominance. The language of spiritual warfare is often invoked, casting political opponents as enemies of God and threatening the very fabric of the nation. Yahwistic symbols, such as the cross and the American flag, become fused together, creating a potent symbol of national identity and religious fervor. But is this truly a reflection of divine will, or a carefully crafted political strategy designed to consolidate power? We also see a recurring tension between nationalist and globalist perspectives within Yahwistic traditions. Do we interpret Yahweh's will as primarily concerned with the well-being of our own nation, or with the welfare of all humanity? This divide shapes attitudes toward international cooperation, immigration policies, and foreign aid. Religious narratives are deployed to justify both isolationism and global engagement, leading to fierce political battles over the direction of national policy. How do we navigate this complex terrain, ensuring that our religious beliefs promote peace and cooperation rather than division and conflict? What's more, Yahwistic institutions and narratives can become instruments of social control. Religious leaders can shape public opinion, reinforce existing power structures, and suppress dissent, as we've seen across history. Narratives of divinely ordained hierarchies, the importance of obedience to authority, and the dangers of questioning tradition can be used to maintain social order. But they can also silence marginalized voices and perpetuate injustice. History is replete with examples of religious leaders using their influence to justify discrimination, censorship, and even violence. And yet, it's often forgotten that religious institutions can also be powerful forces for social change, advocating for justice, equality, and the rights of the oppressed. Summarily, religion can be weaponized to construct identity, exert social control, and advance particular political agendas. But these dynamics don't confine themselves to individual nations. How do these forces manifest on the global stage, shaping international relations and fueling global conflicts? We are about to find out. How do interfaith dynamics influence global conflicts, perpetuating cycles of violence and division? Consider the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, where religious differences between Jews, Christians, and Muslims are often exploited to fuel hatred and animosity. Each side invokes Yahwistic narratives to justify their claims, demonize their opponents, and mobilize their supporters. Religious sites become flashpoints of conflict, and religious leaders often play a key role in shaping public opinion and inciting violence. But here's what most people miss. These conflicts are rarely solely about religion. More often than not, they are intertwined with political, economic, and social factors, with religion serving as a convenient tool for mobilizing support and legitimizing violence. Yahwistic values and beliefs exert a powerful influence on international relations, shaping foreign policy decisions and diplomatic strategies. Nations often frame their foreign policy objectives in moral terms, drawing on religious narratives about justice, freedom, and the fight against evil. Religious organizations play a significant role in humanitarian aid, peacemaking efforts, and international advocacy, often working to alleviate suffering, promote human rights, and mediate conflicts. However, this influence is not always benign. Religious beliefs can also be used to justify interventionism, support authoritarian regimes, and promote narrow national interests. Consider, for example, how the concept of manifest destiny was used to justify the expansion of the United States across North America, displacing and oppressing Native American populations. The rise of religious nationalism as a global phenomenon poses a grave challenge to international relations and democratic values. We see a resurgence of political movements that seek to fuse religious identity with national identity, often at the expense of minority rights and international cooperation, from the United States to India to Russia. Economic inequality, cultural anxieties, and the erosion of traditional social structures contribute to this rise. Religious nationalism has the potential to destabilize international relations, undermine democratic institutions, and fuel violence and discrimination. But we're just scratching the surface of how these forces operate. What we'll discover next about interfaith dialogue, coupled with nuance, is even more shocking. If faith is so often weaponized, can interfaith dialogue provide a path to ethical outcomes? What are the principles and practices of effective interfaith dialogue, fostering empathy, respect, listening, and acknowledging diverse perspectives? Consider the work of organizations like Religions for Peace, which brings together religious leaders from around the world to address pressing global challenges, such as poverty, conflict, and environmental degradation. These initiatives demonstrate the power of interfaith cooperation to build bridges, promote understanding, and create positive social change. But are these efforts enough to overcome the deep-seated divisions that plague our world? What about ethical and critical religious literacy? What steps can people take to promote peace, coexistence, and understanding in their own communities? An education in world religions and critical thinking empowers individuals to engage with religious diversity in a thoughtful and informed manner. An understanding of global issues and events helps us to see the interconnectedness of our world and the importance of working together to address common challenges. Individuals can promote peace, coexistence, and understanding in their own communities by engaging in respectful dialogue, challenging stereotypes, and supporting initiatives that promote inclusivity and social justice. What about embracing nuance as a modern and effective communication tool that moves beyond simplistic generalizations in favor of more ethically grounded decisions. The importance of avoiding binary, good versus evil, outlooks, but embracing modern diversity is what is needed today. The complexities of religious beliefs and practices often defy easy categorization. A nuanced approach allows us to appreciate the richness and diversity of religious traditions, while also recognizing the potential for harm when these traditions are manipulated for political purposes. In summary, we've explored the ethical implications of Yahweh's evolving image, the influence of weaponized faith on political agendas, and the possibilities for peaceful solutions through interfaith dialogue and critical religious literacy. Can humanity harness the power of belief to create a more just, peaceful, and compassionate world? What role will we choose to play in this unfolding narrative? If interfaith dialogue, coupled with nuance, is our future, how can we bring faith to life through action? Can we truly know what ancient Yahwistic rituals were like, or are we forever limited by fragmentary evidence and modern biases? The quest to reconstruct ancient Yahwistic rituals is fraught with challenges. We are not simply piecing together a historical puzzle, but attempting to breathe life back into practices that have been dormant for centuries. This endeavor demands a careful balance of scholarly rigor, creative imagination, and ethical awareness. Are we engaging in authentic reconstruction, or merely projecting our own desires and preconceptions onto the past? To even begin reconstructing these rituals, we must consult three primary source materials. First, there's the archaeological evidence, physical artifacts such as altars, inscriptions, and cultic objects. These tangible remains offer glimpses into the material aspects of ancient worship, providing clues about ritual spaces, sacrificial practices, and the objects used in ceremonies. For example, the altar discovered at Tel Dan, with its horned corners, corroborates biblical descriptions of Israelite altars. Inscriptions, such as the Mesha stele, offer insights into the religious beliefs and practices of neighboring kingdoms, allowing for comparative analysis. However, archaeological evidence is often fragmentary and open to multiple interpretations. Second, we turn to the biblical texts. Descriptions of sacrifices, festivals, and priestly duties are found throughout the Hebrew Bible, offering a wealth of information about ancient Yahwistic practices. Leviticus, in particular, provides detailed instructions for various types of offerings and the procedures to be followed by the priests. However, it's crucial to acknowledge the potential biases and limitations of these texts. The biblical authors had their own theological agendas and may have selectively presented or interpreted historical events. Third, we must engage in comparative religion. By drawing parallels between Yahwistic practices and those of other ancient Near Eastern religions, we can gain a broader understanding of the cultural and religious context in which Yahwehism developed. For instance, the practice of offering incense to deities was common throughout the ancient Near East, suggesting a shared cultural heritage. Examining Babylonian, Egyptian, and Canaanite religious texts and archaeological findings can illuminate the similarities and differences between Yahwehism and its neighbors. Each source material has its strengths and weaknesses, and their value truly shines when used in concert. How do we combine these sources in an effective way? Several methods have been used in the reconstruction of these ancient rituals. Textual analysis, the first method, involves interpreting biblical passages and other ancient texts to identify ritual elements, sequences, and meanings. This requires a deep understanding of the Hebrew language, historical context, and literary conventions of the biblical texts. Scholars carefully examine the language used to describe rituals, looking for clues about the actions performed, the objects used, and the meanings attributed to them. For example, the descriptions of the tabernacle and the temple in the Book of Exodus provide detailed instructions for constructing sacred spaces and performing ritual acts. However, textual analysis is limited by the fact that the biblical texts are not always clear or consistent, and they may reflect the biases of the authors. Then, there's archaeological interpretation, which analyzes material remains to reconstruct ritual spaces, objects, and actions. This involves studying the layout of ancient temples, the types of artifacts found at religious sites, and the iconography depicted on ancient seals and pottery. For example, the discovery of numerous animal bones at sacrificial sites provides evidence of the types of animals that were offered in sacrifice. The presence of libation vessels suggests that liquid offerings were also made. This method is limited by the fragmentary nature of the archaeological record and the difficulty of interpreting the meaning of ancient objects. Finally, comparative analysis compares Yahwistic practices with those of other ancient Near Eastern religions to identify common patterns and potential influences. By examining the religious practices of neighboring cultures, scholars can gain a broader understanding of the cultural and religious context in which YAHWEHism developed. For instance, the practice of offering first fruits to deities was common throughout the ancient Near East, suggesting a shared agricultural heritage. However, comparative analysis must be done with caution, as it can be tempting to overemphasize similarities and ignore important differences. The synthesis of these methods helps to give a deeper understanding of ancient Yahwistic rituals. But what about modern Reconstructionists? How do modern practitioners deal with syncretism when undertaking Reconstructionalist rituals? Reconstructionist Judaism, for example, embraces the idea of evolving religious traditions, incorporating modern values and perspectives into ancient practices. This can lead to syncretism, where elements from other religions or cultural traditions are integrated into reconstructed rituals. Ethical issues often arise in these situations. Is it ethical to borrow from other cultures without proper understanding or respect? How do we ensure that reconstructed rituals are authentic and meaningful, rather than simply being a superficial imitation of the past? Furthermore, the revival of ancient practices can sometimes clash with modern ethical values. For example, the practice of animal sacrifice is considered barbaric by many people today. How do we reconcile the desire to reconstruct ancient rituals with the need to uphold ethical standards? And how do we deal with modern issues of inclusivity and gender within these reconstructed rituals? Let's consider the sacrifice ritual in ancient Israel. The steps involved in an ancient Israelite sacrifice began with the careful selection of an animal, typically a bull, sheep, or goat, without blemish. The animal was then brought to the altar, where the person offering the sacrifice would lay their hands upon its head, symbolically transferring their sins or intentions to the animal. The animal was then slaughtered, and its blood was collected in a basin. The priest would then sprinkle the blood on the altar, symbolizing purification and atonement. The animal's organs and fat were burned on the altar as a burnt offering, symbolizing complete devotion to Yahweh. Other parts of the animal were either consumed by the priests or shared with the person offering the sacrifice. The symbolic meaning of different sacrificial offerings varied depending on the type of offering. Burnt offerings were a general expression of devotion and gratitude. Sin offerings were offered to atone for unintentional sins. Peace offerings were offered to celebrate a time of peace and prosperity. The priests played a central role in conducting the sacrifice, ensuring that all the rules and procedures were followed correctly. The priests were considered intermediaries between Yahweh and the people, and their role was essential for maintaining the covenant relationship. Specific biblical passages, such as Leviticus 1:7, describe these sacrificial rituals in detail, while archaeological evidence of altars and sacrificial tools provides tangible confirmation of their existence. What about pilgrimage? The three major pilgrimage festivals in ancient Israel were Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Passover, or Pesach, commemorated the exodus from Egypt when Yahweh delivered the Israelites from slavery. Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, celebrated the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, commemorated the Israelites' wanderings in the desert after the Exodus. Each festival had its historical origins and agricultural significance. Passover was originally a spring festival celebrating the birth of new lambs. Shavuot was a harvest festival celebrating the first fruits of the wheat harvest. Sukkot was a fall festival celebrating the final harvest of the year. The rituals and practices associated with each festival were rich and varied. Passover involved the sacrifice of a lamb, the eating of unleavened bread matzah, and the telling of the Exodus story. Shavuot involved the offering of first fruits, the reading of the Ten Commandments, and the study of Torah. Sukkot involved the construction of temporary shelters, sukkot, the waving of palm branches, lulav, and the rejoicing before Yahweh. Specific biblical passages, such as Exodus 12, Leviticus 23, and Deuteronomy 16, describe these pilgrimage festivals in detail, while archaeological evidence of pilgrimage routes and festival celebrations provides further insights into their practice. But what of the day of rest? Sabbath observance in ancient Israel involved abstaining from work, attending religious services, and sharing meals with family and friends. The Sabbath was considered a day of rest and spiritual renewal, a time to reflect on Yahweh's creation and deliverance of Israel from slavery. The theological significance of the Sabbath was rooted in the creation account in Genesis, where Yahweh rested on the seventh day after creating the world. The Sabbath was also seen as a commemoration of the Exodus, when Yahweh delivered the Israelites from slavery and gave them rest. The social and economic implications of Sabbath observance were significant. By abstaining from work, people were given an opportunity to rest and recharge. The Sabbath also promoted social equality, as all members of society, regardless of their social status, were expected to observe the Sabbath. Specific biblical passages, such as Exodus 20, 8:11, and Deuteronomy 5:12-15, describe Sabbath observance in detail, while archaeological evidence of Sabbath-related activities, such as the discovery of homes with special Sabbath lamps, provides further insights into its practice. What part did ritual immersion play in all of this? Ritual immersion, or mikveh, was a significant practice in ancient Israel, involving the use of water for purification and spiritual cleansing. The societal expectations surrounding mikveh were deeply rooted in beliefs about purity and impurity. Various situations could render a person ritually impure, including contact with a corpse, certain skin diseases, and bodily emissions. In such cases, immersion in a mikveh was required to restore ritual purity. Access to mikvehs was not always equal across genders and classes. While both men and women used mikvehs, women had specific times when immersion was required, such as after menstruation or childbirth. Archaeological evidence suggests that mikvehs were often located near synagogues or in private homes, indicating their importance in daily life. The use of water in ancient rituals symbolized cleansing, renewal, and transition. It was a way of marking boundaries and entering into a new state of being. But how can we determine the validity and authenticity of rituals that may seem foreign to us today? How can we ensure that reconstructed rituals are true to the spirit of ancient YAHWEHism, even if they cannot be perfectly replicated? The challenges involved in determining the validity and authenticity of reconstructed rituals are significant, noting the potential for modern biases and cultural assumptions to influence the process. Modern practitioners may unconsciously project their own values and beliefs onto the past, resulting in a distorted or inaccurate reconstruction. For example, modern notions of gender equality may lead to reinterpretations of ancient rituals that were originally patriarchal in nature. Similarly, modern concerns about environmentalism may lead to the incorporation of ecological themes into reconstructed rituals. It is crucial to be aware of these potential biases and to strive for a balanced and objective approach. What are the known limits of modern interpretation? How can ancient rituals be made meaningful and relevant to modern practitioners? Is it even possible? Exploring the question of relevance and meaning, we must ask how ancient rituals can be made meaningful and relevant to modern practitioners. The need to adapt and reinterpret ancient practices in light of contemporary ethical and spiritual values is a task that requires great care. Consider, for example, modern Jewish interpretations of the Passover Seder. While the traditional Seder plate includes symbolic foods such as matzah, maror bitter herbs, and chereset, a sweet paste, Some modern seders also include items that represent contemporary social justice issues, such as an orange to symbolize LGBTQ inclusion or an olive to symbolize peace in the Middle East. These additions reflect a desire to make the Passover story relevant to modern concerns. Yet, some are concerned that these modern additions can erode the traditional meaning of the ritual. Ethical considerations also arise in connection with cultural appropriation, particularly when reconstructing rituals from a culture that is not one's own. It is essential to emphasize the importance of respect, sensitivity, and a willingness to learn from and collaborate with members of the culture being studied. Are there instances when such practices should be avoided altogether? For example, reconstructing Native American rituals without the consent or involvement of Native American communities would be considered highly unethical. Similarly, appropriating elements from African traditional religions without understanding their cultural context would be deeply disrespectful. The line between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation can be blurry, and it is crucial to err on the side of caution. But what about internal issues? How can we address modern issues of inclusivity, gender, and representation in the practice of reconstruction? Discussing modern issues in a practice from the past, as well as the issues that can come from a practice from the past, it is imperative to address issues of inclusivity, gender, and representation in reconstructed rituals. Many ancient rituals were exclusionary, limited to certain social groups or genders. Modern practitioners must grapple with these issues and find ways to create rituals that are inclusive and welcoming to all. For example, some feminist scholars have reinterpreted ancient goddess traditions to create rituals that celebrate female power and empowerment. Others have challenged patriarchal interpretations of biblical texts and sought to create more egalitarian rituals. The goal is to create rituals that are both authentic to the spirit of the past and relevant to the needs of the present. With such a goal in mind, can chaos magic and reconstructionist approaches possibly be combined? Reviewing key concepts of chaos magic, including working with servitors and deity archetypes, how might this system be combined with a reconstructionist approach to YAHWEH? And what would the ethical practices of such a synthesis look like? Chaos magicians often utilize servitors, which are created thought forms empowered to carry out specific tasks. Deity archetypes are used as focal points for ritual work, drawing upon the energy and symbolism associated with particular deities. How can chaos magicians learn from reconstructionalist theology and vice versa? The Reconstructionist ethical code emphasizes historical accuracy, cultural sensitivity, and respect for the traditions being studied. Chaos magicians could benefit from this approach by grounding their work in a deeper understanding of the historical and cultural context of YAHWEHistic traditions. Reconstructionists, on the other hand, might find value in the chaos magic approach to experimentation and personal gnosis, allowing for a more dynamic and creative engagement with ancient practices. What challenges might arise from combining chaos magic with reconstructionalist theology? Does striving for historical accuracy matter when modernizing rituals? Is authenticity even possible? How can chaos magicians be authentic in their practice? The very nature of chaos magic prioritizes results and personal experience over strict adherence to tradition. Combining these approaches requires a delicate balance between respecting the past and embracing the present. But in a political landscape increasingly divided by religion and cultural identity, what are the implications of reviving a faith, reconstructed or otherwise? Are ancient syncretism and modern cultural exchange related? Discussing modern ethical and political implications of modern cultural exchange, and creating a comparison with the ethics of cultural exchange in the ancient world, we find an evolving expression. Syncretism, the blending of different religious or cultural traditions, was a common feature of the ancient world. As different cultures came into contact with one another, they often borrowed and adapted elements from each other's religions and practices. This process of cultural exchange led to the emergence of new and hybrid religious forms. Today, we see similar processes at work in the modern world, as globalization and increased intercultural communication lead to the blending of different cultural traditions. However, modern cultural exchange is often characterized by power imbalances and the potential for cultural appropriation. How does this differ from the syncretism of the past and can either be ethical? What does it mean to revive a dead god? Is this truly reconstruction? What is the role of the modern practitioner in reinterpreting or recreating the framework of a religion? When reconstructing, reimagining, or reviving a faith, we need to acknowledge the dangers and limitations of creating a new system of belief. How can this new system reinforce or tear down existing cultural structures? What is lost when ancient religious systems are altered? What is gained? How can modern religious practices be used as a political tool? And what about the ethical, legal, and geopolitical concerns? Is it ethical to reconstruct or to reimagine? Is there a call to responsible faith? Reiterating the power of belief and reiterating the need for nuance, we are left with more questions than answers. What are the ethical implications of attempting to revive or reconstruct ancient religions? How do we balance the desire for authenticity with the need for relevance in the modern world? And how do we ensure that reconstructed religions are not used to promote harmful or discriminatory ideologies? We've explored the complex process of reconstructing ancient Yahwistic rituals, the ethical considerations involved in cultural appropriation and inclusivity, the possibilities for synthesizing chaos magic with reconstructionist approaches, and the modern political landscape surrounding reconstructed faith. But what does it mean to truly engage with a religion, whether ancient or modern, reconstructed or reimagined? What role does humankind play in the creation of belief? And how will this reconstructed or reimagined YAHWEH influence faith in the future? Acknowledging the vast landscape of esoteric thought, we recognize that Kabbalah and Gnosticism are not the only esoteric traditions that have engaged with YAHWEH, as a multitude of other systems offer unique perspectives. Traditions like Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, and the Lemma, each with their diverse origins and influences, inherit and transform earlier esoteric ideas, creating a rich tapestry of interpretations. These traditions draw from sources as varied as ancient Egyptian religion, Greek philosophy, Eastern mysticism, and medieval alchemy, resulting in eclectic systems that often challenge conventional understandings of divinity. Interpretations of YAHWEH within these traditions vary significantly and often diverge from mainstream theology, presenting alternative frameworks for understanding his nature and role in the cosmos. Understanding the diverse origins of these traditions, drawing from sources such as ancient Egyptian religion, Greek philosophy, and Eastern mysticism, is crucial to illustrating their eclectic nature. In essence, to ignore them would be to ignore an entire library of esoteric engagement with the divine. Among these traditions, the Lemma stands out as particularly relevant for understanding later esoteric reinterpretations of YAHWEH. The Lemma, founded by Aleister Crowley, explicitly engages with Judeo-Christian symbolism and transvalues traditional religious values, offering a radical departure from conventional theology. Aleister Crowley, a key figure in shaping the Lemmic thought, was an intellectual explorer, occultist, and ceremonial magician who sought to synthesize various esoteric traditions into a unified system. Born in 1875, Crowley rebelled against his strict religious upbringing and embarked on a lifelong quest for spiritual enlightenment, exploring various occult practices, including ceremonial magic, yoga, and tantra. His travels took him to far-flung corners of the world, where he studied with various teachers and immersed himself in diverse spiritual traditions. The Book of the Law, received by Crowley in 1904, serves as the foundational text of the Lemma, proclaiming the dawn of a new eon characterized by individual freedom and the pursuit of one's true will, an idea that challenges traditional notions of religious authority and obedience. In framing the reinterpretation of YAHWEH within the Lemma, it is crucial to understand that the Lemma often re-envisions deities from various religions as symbolic representations of universal principles or aspects of the self, rather than literal, anthropomorphic beings. YAHWEH, in this context, may be reinterpreted as a symbol of a specific force or aspect of consciousness, such as power, authority, or tradition. This symbolic interpretation allows the Lemmites to engage with religious figures in a more personal and transformative way, using them as tools for self-discovery and spiritual growth. How, then, does the Lemma integrate and transform the figure of YAHWEH within its unique symbolic system, particularly in relation to the concept of the new eon? It is important to emphasize that interpretations of YAHWEH within the Lemma often diverge significantly from mainstream theology and can be controversial or even blasphemous from a traditional perspective. Crowley's explicit critique of Judeo-Christian morality and his embrace of pagan and occult symbolism challenge conventional understandings of God and religious authority. The potential for these reinterpretations to challenge conventional understandings of God and religious authority lies in Crowley's rejection of traditional notions of sin, guilt, and obedience, replacing them with an emphasis on individual sovereignty, self-expression, and the pursuit of one's true will. This challenge to traditional religious values has made the Lemma a controversial and often misunderstood tradition, but it has also attracted those who seek a more personalized and empowering approach to spirituality. At the core of the Lemma lies the concept of the great work, the individual's path of self-discovery and spiritual transformation. This process involves aligning oneself with one's true will and fulfilling one's unique purpose in the universe, a task that may involve challenging conventional morality and societal norms. True will is not merely a matter of personal preference or egoic desire, but rather a deep and abiding sense of one's unique purpose and destiny in the universe. It is the guiding force that leads individuals to fulfill their potential and contribute to the overall evolution of consciousness. This concept stands in stark contrast to egoic desires and societal expectations, which often lead individuals astray from their true path. Embracing the great work means embracing the entirety of one's being. The Lemma often views deities and religious figures as symbols that can be used to facilitate personal transformation and spiritual growth, rather than as literal beings to be worshipped. This approach emphasizes the importance of understanding the symbolic meaning of religious figures, rather than taking them literally. The potential for using these symbols to access deeper levels of consciousness and unlock hidden aspects of the self lies in their ability to resonate with the unconscious mind, triggering powerful emotional and psychological responses. Connecting the concept of the God form within the Lemma to Jungian psychology, we can see deities as archetypal forces within the human psyche, representing different aspects of our personality and potential. This recognition of the symbolic underpinnings of religious belief allows practitioners to achieve true spiritual liberation. Highlighting the importance of correspondences and interconnectedness in the Lemma, we note how different symbols, deities, and aspects of the universe are seen as interconnected and mutually influencing. This perspective leads to a more holistic and integrated understanding of reality, where everything is seen as part of a larger, interconnected web of relationships. Discussing the concept of the tree of life in the Lemma, we note how it is used to map correspondences between different deities, symbols, and aspects of the self. For example, the Sephira of Hesed, mercy, on the tree of life is associated with the planet Jupiter, the color blue, and the archangel Tzadkiel, creating a network of interconnected meanings that can be used to deepen one's understanding of this particular aspect of the divine. This interconnectedness extends beyond the individual psyche, encompassing the entire cosmos and all its manifestations. These principles are not merely abstract philosophical concepts, but are means for bringing about personal transformation and spiritual evolution, emphasizing self-reliance, personal responsibility, and the rejection of external authority. Crowley's emphasis on individual sovereignty and the pursuit of one's true will serves as a path to spiritual liberation, encouraging individuals to challenge conventional norms and embrace their unique potential. This emphasis on individual sovereignty is a key aspect of thelemic thought, reflecting a broader trend in modern spirituality towards personalized and empowering approaches to religious practice. This rejection of external authority extends to all forms of dogma, tradition, and social pressure, encouraging individuals to think for themselves and to make their own decisions based on their own experiences and understanding. Analyzing passages from Liber Alvel Leges, the Book of the Law that reference Yahweh, we can explore how he is reinterpreted within the context of the new eon. The replacement of the slave gods of the past with the concept of individual sovereignty and the pursuit of one's true will represents a radical departure from traditional monotheistic theology. Analyzing the phrase, had, the manifestation of Nuit, we can explain its implications for understanding the nature of the divine. Nuit, the goddess of infinite space, represents the ultimate source of all existence, while Hadit, the infinitely concentrated point, represents the individual soul. This pairing represents the union of the macrocosm and the microcosm, the infinite and the finite, in a dynamic and ever-evolving relationship. The potential for interpreting Yahweh as a symbol of the old eon that must be transcended lies in his association with law, authority, and external control, which are seen as limitations on individual freedom and self-expression. Discussing Crowley's commentary on the Book of the Law and his interpretation of Yahweh in relation to other deities and symbolic figures, we can explore how Crowley viewed Yahweh as a representative of a particular stage in human spiritual evolution, one that is now being superseded by the principles of the new eon. Crowley viewed Yahweh as a dying god, whose power is waning in the face of the rising forces of the new eon, representing an era of limitation, restriction, and external authority that is no longer relevant to the spiritual needs of humanity. But did Crowley accurately portray Yahweh? Did he miss important nuances? Comparing this reinterpretation of Yahweh with earlier views, Gnostic, Kabbalistic, we can highlight the key differences and similarities, while exploring the ethical implications of this reinterpretation, noting how it might lead to a different approach to morality and social responsibility. This reinterpretation challenges conventional monotheistic ethics and emphasizes individual autonomy, self-expression, and the pursuit of one's true will, even if it conflicts with societal norms. Unlike earlier Gnostic and Kabbalistic interpretations, which often sought to reconcile esoteric insights with traditional religious frameworks, the lemma explicitly rejects traditional morality and embraces a more individualistic and relativistic ethical system. What about the law? Discussing how modern thelemites incorporate Yahweh into their rituals and practices, we can provide concrete examples. We might mention specific rituals or meditations that involve invoking Yahweh as a symbolic representation of a particular force or aspect of consciousness, such as the Abramlin operation, which involves invoking various deities and spirits, including those associated with the Judeo-Christian tradition. While this may be the case, it is important to remember that this framework can be applied to any socio-political landscape. But are they truly worshiping Yahweh? Briefly summarizing the key takeaways from the examples, we can emphasize the unique aspects of the thelemic reinterpretation of Yahweh. Reinforcing the idea that the lemma views deities as symbols that can be used to facilitate personal transformation and spiritual growth, particularly in the context of the great work. In essence, this framework is about applying ancient ideas to modern concepts. Reiterating the overarching theme of the video, we find the continuous reinterpretation of Yahweh throughout history, reflecting the changing needs and perspectives of different cultures and individuals, and highlighting the diversity of perspectives and the lack of a single, definitive interpretation. As this pattern continues to emerge, we see the shift toward individualistic interpretations of religious icons. How can the individual be certain that their interpretations are true? Challenging viewers to question their own assumptions about God and religion, and to consider the potential for alternative perspectives and interpretations, We encourage them to explore the esoteric dimensions of religious history and to embrace the complexity and ambiguity of the divine. By exploring this, modern man may consider his own spiritual growth through challenging conventional beliefs and embracing individual sovereignty. But how can he know? What are the implications of this ongoing process of reinterpretation for understanding the nature of religion, the power of belief, and the human quest for meaning? How do modern geopolitics play a role in this dynamic? How, then, can we apply these esoteric concepts of the ever-changing interpretations of Yahweh to the modern landscape, a landscape rife with conflict and division? Let's consider a contemporary scenario: debates surrounding abortion rights. On one side, we find deeply held religious beliefs emphasizing the sanctity of life from conception, rooted in interpretations of divine law and Yahweh's will. On the other, we see arguments for bodily autonomy and individual freedom, often grounded in principles of compassion and social justice. How do these seemingly irreconcilable positions reflect fundamentally different understandings of Yahweh's character and moral demands? Conservative interpretations often emphasize Yahweh's role as a divine lawgiver, a judge who demands obedience to his commandments. This perspective typically stresses the importance of traditional values, the sanctity of life, and the need to adhere to established religious doctrines. Such interpretations often align with specific social and political positions, such as opposition to abortion, same-sex marriage, and certain forms of contraception. Divine law, in this view, is seen as absolute and unchanging, providing a clear moral compass for navigating complex ethical dilemmas. Yet, is this truly ethical? In contrast, liberal and progressive interpretations prioritize Yahweh's attributes of love, mercy, and social justice. This perspective tends to emphasize the importance of compassion, empathy, and the need to advocate for the marginalized and oppressed. These views often support policies that promote social equality, environmental protection, and access to health care, including abortion services. Divine love, in this context, is seen as unconditional and all-encompassing, extending to all individuals regardless of their beliefs or circumstances. This love is then used as a basis for ethical and policy decisions. Modern individuals grapple with these divergent views in various ways. Many attempt to reconcile faith and reason, seeking to integrate scientific knowledge and modern ethical frameworks with their religious beliefs. Others struggle with the tension between justice and mercy, debating whether it is ethical to prioritize one over the other. The concept of divine command theory, which posits that morality is based on Yahweh's commands, raises further questions about how these commands are interpreted and by whom. Scientific ethics often comes into conflict with ancient scripture, creating a paradox of belief. Indeed, it is not uncommon to find differing and conflicting personal ethics emerging from one single central religious document. It becomes clear that ethical reasoning must extend beyond simplistic appeals to religious authority, requiring a nuanced understanding of diverse perspectives and a willingness to engage in critical self-reflection. Now that we have seen just how radically different ethical interpretation can occur, consider the dangers of weaponized faith and political control. How might these differing views of Yahweh be manipulated for political gain? Religious symbols and narratives are frequently employed to construct and reinforce political identities, creating a sense of belonging and exclusion. Consider, for instance, the Star of David in Israeli politics, where it serves as a potent symbol of national identity and religious affiliation. Similarly, the cross has become a prominent emblem in American Christian nationalism, often associated with conservative political ideologies. Interpretations of jihad within Islamic extremism are frequently weaponized as well. How do these symbols create a sense of belonging for some while simultaneously creating a sense of exclusion for others? How are these symbols, and the narratives they represent, strategically employed to rally support for particular political agendas? The figure of Yahweh is central to the ongoing tension between nationalism and globalism. Specific interpretations of scripture can lead to xenophobia and exclusion, creating a separation of culture and identity that otherizes non-believers. The Old Testament details Yahweh's chosen people, but chosen over whom? Other interpretations, however, emphasize a global, unified, and harmonious outcome, envisioning a brotherhood of man that transcends national and cultural boundaries. This then raises the question, is it possible to reconcile these competing visions of Yahweh's role in the world? Is this not a microcosm for the macrocosm of competing belief systems? Religious institutions and figures exert considerable influence on public opinion and political outcomes, often reinforcing existing power structures. Religious lobbying groups, media outlets, and educational institutions play a significant role in shaping political discourse and mobilizing voters. Is it ethical for a religious institution to wield greater influence than an ordinary citizen? Are these institutions simply conduits for divine wisdom, or are they instruments of social control? The use of Yahwistic-influenced ideologies can create an us versus them social environment, fueling conflict and division. Given this tendency, what is the role of power dynamics in the weaponization of Yahweh? Can religious beliefs be manipulated to serve political agendas, and if so, what are the consequences? Having established the foundations of the conflict and weaponization, let's turn our attention to its geopolitical manifestations. Current interfaith conflicts serve as stark reminders of the contemporary impacts of religious divisions. External actors, including states and organizations, often exacerbate these tensions for political gain, with devastating consequences for the people living in affected regions. Consider the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where religious claims and historical narratives are intertwined with political aspirations and territorial disputes. In Nigeria, clashes between Christian and Muslim communities are often fueled by economic inequality and political marginalization. What role do external actors play in exacerbating these tensions, and what are the costs for the affected populations? Are these struggles truly about faith, or are they merely proxies for larger geopolitical ambitions? Faith-based advocacy groups exert considerable influence on the geopolitical stage, shaping international relations and foreign policy. Religious organizations also play a significant role in providing foreign aid, often operating in regions where governments are unable or unwilling to provide assistance. How do these actions impact international relations? What are the potential benefits and drawbacks of faith-based diplomacy? Religious nationalism has a profound impact on international relations, shaping alliances, fueling conflicts, and influencing global power dynamics. Comparing and contrasting current events with geopolitical touchstones of the past, we can gain insights into the dangers and potential benefits of religious nationalism. The rise of Hindu nationalism in India, for example, has implications for regional stability and international trade. Likewise, the resurgence of religious nationalism in Europe has fueled debates about immigration, multiculturalism, and the future of the European Union. Given these complex dynamics, is religious nationalism a force for good or ill in the world? In sum, the influence of weaponized faith systems is undeniable, shaping political landscapes, fueling conflicts, and influencing international relations. As we prepare to focus on a call to arms, we must ask, is Reconstructionist theology part of the solution or part of the problem? Can we harness the power of faith for positive change, or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Engaging ethically in this complex landscape requires a commitment to deconstructing the other and fostering interfaith dialogue with nuance and respect. Establishing interfaith discussions in small communities can be a powerful way to bridge divides and promote understanding. Acknowledging the difficulties inherent in these discussions, we can approach them with humility and a willingness to listen and learn from others. How do we create safe spaces for these conversations to occur, and how do we ensure that all voices are heard and valued? Modern and responsible literacy requires a clear, shared understanding of geopolitical and historical touchstones. The ethics of responsible information dissemination demand that we approach complex issues with intellectual honesty and a commitment to accuracy. How can we combat misinformation and promote critical thinking in an age of information overload? What role do educational institutions and media outlets play in shaping public understanding of these issues? Tearing down binaries with nuance is essential for promoting understanding and empathy. Deconstructing the good versus evil dichotomy requires us to acknowledge the complexities of YAHWEH and the diversity of potential interpretations. Can we move beyond simplistic moral judgments and embrace a more nuanced understanding of human behavior? Promoting respect and dignity requires us to understand intersectional ideas and to recognize the inherent worth of all individuals. How can we foster a culture of empathy and compassion that transcends religious and cultural boundaries? In closing, a clear and actionable plan for moving forward with faith-based discussions must include a commitment to respectful dialogue, critical thinking, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions. By embracing nuance and rejecting simplistic binaries, we can move closer to a more just and peaceful world. But is this too idealistic a vision? Or is it a necessary step towards a more harmonious future? What comes next may shock you. If multiple groups claim to worship the same God, yet hold diametrically opposed ethical views, does their shared faith unite them or further divide them? Is religious tolerance truly a bridge to agreement and peaceful coexistence, or can shared ideological language paradoxically exacerbate conflict, especially given the weaponized faith systems we've discussed? If there is no consensus on what YAHWEH demands, how can there truly be a shared faith? As we've seen, YAHWEH's malleability has allowed for a spectrum of interpretations, each with its own ethical implications. Gnostic interpretations, for instance, depict YAHWEH as a flawed demiurge, a stark contrast to the benevolent creator of mainstream theology. Kabbalistic traditions offer esoteric interpretations that emphasize the symbolic dimensions of YAHWEH, viewing him as a complex and multifaceted divine being. Thelemic perspectives, drawing on Crowley's teachings, emphasize individual will and self-deification, reinterpreting YAHWEH as a symbol of personal power. Reconstructionist theology seeks to re-evaluate and reinterpret traditional Jewish beliefs in light of modern values and ethical considerations. With such disparate views, it becomes clear that there is no single, correct interpretation, but rather a kaleidoscope of perspectives shaped by historical, cultural, and personal factors. But how are these interpretations put to use in our modern world? Consider the various motivations that drive different groups to selectively emphasize certain aspects of YAHWEH's character and ethical teachings, while downplaying or ignoring others. Political gain is a major factor, with religious rhetoric frequently used to mobilize support for specific policies or candidates. For example, politicians might invoke biblical passages about traditional family values to rally conservative voters, while simultaneously overlooking verses about social justice and compassion for the poor. This selective emphasis can create a distorted image of YAHWEH, one that serves political agendas rather than reflecting a comprehensive understanding of his teachings. Cultural supremacy also plays a significant role. Asserting the superiority of one's own group or culture based on religious beliefs is a common phenomenon throughout history. This can manifest in exclusionary attitudes towards other religions or cultures, or in the justification of discriminatory practices based on religious interpretations. Think of historical justifications for colonialism or slavery, where certain groups claimed divine favor to subjugate others. This raises the disturbing question: how can religious beliefs be used to justify oppression and inequality? Maintaining social order is another powerful motivator. Religious norms are often used to enforce conformity and suppress dissent, with those who challenge traditional beliefs facing social ostracism or even persecution. This can create a chilling effect on free thought and inquiry, stifling intellectual and spiritual growth. Consider the historical suppression of scientific discoveries that challenged religious dogma, or the ongoing persecution of religious minorities in certain parts of the world. But does social order justify the suppression of individual liberties and the restriction of access to knowledge? These divergent interpretations give rise to a series of pointed ethical questions. What is the responsibility of religious leaders to promote ethical behavior and discourage violence, even when it conflicts with popular opinion or political expediency? How can individuals navigate conflicting ethical demands when their religious beliefs clash with their personal values or societal norms? If Yahweh is love, does that love extend to the heretic? What role should religious belief play in public policy debates, and how can we ensure that all voices are heard and respected, regardless of their religious or non-religious affiliation? What about those who have been harmed by faith systems? Perhaps most pressingly, what is the responsibility for people to be educated about different faith systems and about the way that systems were created? If the truth is not delivered effectively, it is as good as a lie. This raises a further question. Is nuance a crutch used to obfuscate and avoid difficult truths, or a tool used to promote understanding and empathy? Does education provide a path forward, empowering individuals to make informed ethical decisions, or simply create a more devious opponent, one who can manipulate religious rhetoric for their own ends? The challenge before us is not to find easy platitudes or simplistic solutions, but to think critically about the complex interplay of faith, ethics, and power. As we transition to our final discussion, consider this. If interpretations of Yahweh can be so radically different and so easily manipulated for political gain, what does that say about the nature of faith itself? What if the most dangerous thing is not the existence of any one interpretation, but our inclination to believe that interpretation is unassailable? As we draw towards the culmination of our exploration into the multifaceted history of Yahweh, from ancient Near Eastern storm deity to the complex and often contested figure at the heart of modern monotheism, it is time to consolidate our understanding. While definitive answers regarding matters of faith and ancient history often remain elusive, our journey has illuminated the intricate pathways through which religious concepts evolve and adapt. Let us now draw together the threads of syncretism, political influence, and esoteric interpretation that have shaped Yahweh's enduring narrative. Throughout our exploration, the recurring themes of syncretism, political manipulation, and esoteric reinterpretation have acted as the primary drivers behind Yahweh's evolution across diverse historical epochs and cultural milieus. As we have seen, these themes rarely operate in isolation. Political agendas have frequently propelled religious reforms, theological interpretations have been used to bolster political power, and syncretism has constantly infused Yahwistic traditions with elements drawn from other belief systems. Esoteric interpretations, meanwhile, have offered alternative perspectives on Yahweh's nature and his role within the grand cosmic drama. This interplay highlights a central tension. Is Yahweh a fixed, immutable deity or a malleable concept shaped by human belief, intention, and circumstance? Navigating this tension, as we've observed, has led to both periods of unifying consensus and eras of divisive conflict. As we find ourselves in an increasingly polarized world, where even shared religious symbols can become flashpoints, how can an understanding of this complex history offer a path toward reconciliation? Returning to the initial questions that sparked our inquiry, how did Yahweh evolve from a local storm god to the universal creator god of monotheism? How did his relationship with other deities transform over time? What role did political and social factors play in shaping his image? We can now appreciate the multifaceted nature of the answers. From the echoes of Canaanite deities within early Yahwistic traditions to the impact of Mesopotamian culture and the reforms enacted during the Deuteronomic period, we have witnessed the forces that molded and remolded Yahweh's identity. The Babylonian exile, Gnostic reinterpretations, Kabbalistic mysticism, and modern esoteric traditions have each left their indelible mark, contributing to the ever-evolving tapestry of Yahweh's story. While some questions will inevitably remain subject to scholarly debate and theological interpretation, the journey itself has revealed the dynamic and ever-changing nature of religious belief. When addressing concepts spanning cultures and epochs, is it reasonable to expect definitive conclusions, or is the ongoing process of interpretation itself the most significant aspect of faith? The specific narrative of Yahweh's evolution resonates far beyond the confines of religious history. It speaks to the very nature of religion, the potency of belief, the construction of identity, the roots of conflict, and the perennial human search for meaning and purpose. Consider the profound implications of our findings for understanding the role of religion in shaping individual lives, social structures, and global political dynamics. Religious beliefs can, and frequently do, galvanize compassion and altruism. Yet, as history tragically demonstrates, they can also be twisted to justify unspeakable acts of violence and oppression. Can the study of religious evolution cultivate enhanced understanding, empathy, and tolerance within our religiously diverse global community? And how do we navigate the fine line between respecting diverse beliefs and challenging harmful ideologies? As we've seen, the various interpretations of Yahweh carry significant ethical implications, especially those that challenge conventional morality or promote exclusion and discrimination. Engaging with religious beliefs and practices in a responsible and ethical manner is, therefore, of paramount importance. Studying religious history can provide deep insights into the human condition and the search for meaning. It's a worthwhile exploration of our modern social, political, and ethical challenges. In undertaking this intellectual journey, we have gained a more profound understanding of the intricate interplay between faith, history, and human experience, gaining insights that will better inform our perception of day-to-day events and of others. Can a more informed understanding of faith-based motivations contribute to a more harmonious and stable future for all? In closing, the Odyssey of Yahweh serves as a striking illustration of the enduring force of belief, the complex pathways of religious evolution, and the ceaseless human endeavor to find significance in the cosmos. It underscores the essence of embracing nuance, interrogating assumptions, and engaging with the world through the dual lenses of analytical scrutiny and heartfelt compassion. As interpretations morph and faith becomes a tool of conflict, the necessity of returning to nuance and reason emerges as the cornerstone for nurturing a harmonious future. As beliefs undergo perpetual change, the onus falls upon individuals to adapt and to exercise judicious discernment in all their choices. As we consider the future, the lessons learned through understanding the past will become ever more critical in navigating the currents of faith, reason, and human connection. If you found this exploration of Yahweh's hidden history enlightening, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more esoteric explorations, and share your own thoughts in the comments below. We encourage respectful debate as a means of collectively approaching absolute truth. What other topics would you like us to explore in future videos? Through examining the diverse interpretations of Yahweh across history, we gain valuable insights into the complex interplay of religion, politics, and human experience. We have successfully traced the transformation of Yahweh from a regional storm god to a global icon, and have demonstrated the value of education, and the need for education and access to it to continue to be a part of all faiths. In closing, we will continue to seek the light. Until next time.